If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description. Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.
Chapter 21, Bluffing. Illyrio exuded an aura of luxury, but in a more remote area, he would stand out like a fish out of water. However, his bodyguards were no amateurs. The coachman and the guards following the carriage were not to be underestimated. Especially noteworthy was the guard in the brown coat, whose broad chest and strong thighs hinted at his prowess even through his clothes. Illyrio himself had once been an assassin, and his entourage were no slouches either. They quickly sized each other up with practiced ease. "Prince Viserys," Illyrio called out as he descended from the carriage with the help of his escort, a smile on his lips. "Lord Illyrio," Viserys replied. "You are becoming more and more like Prince Rhaegar." Illyrio knew better than to compare Viserys to his father, the Mad King. Instead, he chose to flatter Viserys by comparing him to Rhaegar, who still had a good reputation despite his flaws. "Ha, you're joking. I'm no match for my brother. But you're in luck. The fog in Braavos has lifted a lot since you were announced to be coming." The two exchanged pleasantries and headed towards the living room. Illyrio quickly noted that Viserys had changed. Previously, Viserys had been stiff and formal in social situations. Now, he carried himself with casual confidence. Despite living in a place that was not as grand as before, Viserys made it seem stylish with his bearing. As they passed through the courtyard, Illyrio noticed the mannequins and weapons rack. While the clean weapons rack could be attributed to diligent servants, the densely marked dummy target told a different story. It indicated that Viserys had not neglected his martial arts training. Soon, they arrived at the living room. The furnishings were relatively ordinary, with a reasonable number of lamps, all courtesy of Morel. However, a few chairs caught Illyrio's attention. They were a bit too wide. When Illyrio sat down, he found them to be soft and comfortable, almost like being embraced. With the intuition of a successful businessman, he immediately recognized the value of these chairs. Could it be a new product from Braavos? No, if Braavos had such a thing, I would have heard about it. He thought. Could it be that the young prince had designed the chair himself? Suppressing his curiosity for the moment, Illyrio refocused on Viserys. "I heard that the prince has been doing some business with loans lately." "Ha, yes, it's just enough to support my sister," Viserys replied, generously explaining how he had entered this industry. His unreserved attitude impressed Illyrio. Illyrio knew that some fallen nobles could be overly ambitious yet lack practical skills, unwilling to do any real work and preferring to remain poor. As a businessman with a pragmatic instinct, Viserys' attitude resonated with him. However, if Viserys intended to live like this indefinitely without any ambition to restore his kingdom, his investment value would be significantly reduced. "What are your plans for the future, Prince?" Illyrio asked indirectly, probing for Viserys' true ambitions. Viserys' lips curled slightly into a knowing smile. Instead of answering Illyrio's question directly, he posed one of his own. "Do you think Robert's rule is stable?" Illyrio's eyes widened a fraction before he replied thoughtfully, "When Robert first raised an army, he had the backing of the North, the Vale and the Riverlands. He and Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, were both wards of Lord Arryn of the Vale, and the two were like brothers. Later, he gained the support of the Westerlands by marrying Cersei. Under these circumstances, Highgarden also pledged its allegiance. As for Dorne, they are somewhat isolated and weak." Viserys nodded, understanding the implications. When the Targaryens were first overthrown, Dorne had even approached him to discuss a marriage alliance, only to later swear fealty to Robert. Their willingness to engage with Viserys had diminished as Robert's rule solidified. Illyrio's point was clear: Viserys' chances of reclaiming the throne were slim, and he wanted to gauge Viserys' reaction. "My lord," Viserys began, "I believe the fate of Westeros may ultimately be decided by a woman." Illyrio raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean? Take Robert, for example. The Baratheons are all black-haired and blue-eyed, yet his 3 children are blonde and blue-eyed. Another example, in the early years, rumors abounded that Peter Baelish boasted of sleeping with Catelyn Tully, but the one who was in love with him was her sister, Lisa. You know what happened to Lisa? She married Jon Arryn, a man old enough to be her father. Littlefinger's rise to power in the court is inseparable from her influence." Illyrio, a merchant who thrived on information, leaned in, clearly fascinated by Viserys' insights. Viserys continued, Have you heard about Ned Stark's bastard? Illyrio nodded, curious if there was more to the story. It's said that the boy might actually be Rhaegar's son with Lyanna Stark, Viserys revealed mysteriously. Illyrio's eyes widened in surprise. The notion seemed implausible at first, but then he realized it wasn't entirely impossible. Everyone in the Seven Kingdoms knew about Rhaegar and Lyanna, and their relationship had been one of the catalysts for Robert's rebellion. However, the implications of Viserys' statement were profound. This is the benefit of being a transmigrator, Viserys thought proudly, feeling a pang of sympathy for his nephew. But Illyrio's instinct to seek verification quickly kicked in. Your news. Viserys remained enigmatic. Varys, he said simply. Illyrio's eyes widened in realization. It all made sense. When it came to information, no one was better than Varys. He hadn't considered that Varys might still be in contact with Viserys, even from within the Red Keep. Illyrio looked at Viserys with newfound respect. No wonder he had recovered from the blow of the Feast of the Crown. He had found a powerful ally. But how had Varys managed to contact him? And why hadn't Illyrio known about it? Before he could puzzle it out, Viserys changed the subject. I recently heard a very wise saying, good luck does not favor fools, and opportunities are reserved for those who are prepared. He continued, a good knight keeps his sword sharp at all times, waiting for the right moment. Practicing martial arts, studying, and even saving money, these are all things I need to do and am doing. Chapter 22, Hoarding Rare Goods. A man as astute as Illyrio couldn't be fooled by Viserys' lofty words. What truly intrigued him was the possibility that Viserys had the support of Varys. He wondered why Varys hadn't informed him, but he knew better than to reveal their secret now. Illyrio clapped his hands, signaling to the brown-clad guard. Bring me the gift I prepared for the prince. The guard looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, lord, I left the gift in the carriage. Illyrio feigned anger. You useless piece of trash, you can't even do this simple task. Go get it. Yes, lord. The guard hurried out of the room, his demeanor relaxing as soon as he turned away. Viserys understood the game. If he hadn't shown potential or value, the gift might never have been given. But he knew better than to question it. They would keep their thoughts to themselves and maintain the charade of friendship. While the guard retrieved the gift, Dany finally emerged from her room. She wore a light purple dress and moved gracefully, her long silver hair adorned with delicate accessories. Her small hands lifted the hem of her skirt, revealing a vision of ethereal beauty. With her silver hair and violet eyes, she looked like a moonlit fairy, an elf among flowers. Brother, Dany said softly to Viserys, before turning to Illyrio. This is Illyrio, Viserys reminded her. Illyrio's eyes widened in amazement as he looked at Dany. He took a moment to compose himself before returning her greeting. Viserys, noticing Illyrio's distraction, said to Dany, come, sit by my side. Dany obediently sat next to Viserys, her back straight and her manners impeccable. Illyrio had seen Dany before at the house with the red door, where she had been an adorable child. Now, she was blossoming into a captivating young woman. Although she wasn't yet in full bloom, she had already developed a striking presence. In the original storyline, Illyrio was supposed to meet the Viserys siblings a few years later, when Dany was around 12 or 13 and had just started menstruating. In Viserys' world, such a marriage would be considered criminal, but here, it was the norm. Even at 15 or 16, Dany had the potential to charm a sellsword leader and make him her loyal advisor. Illyrio's reaction to seeing Dany's beauty, even at a younger age, had been one of shock. Now, seeing her a little more mature, he was equally captivated. Illyrio paused for a moment, then continued, Prince, you mentioned that you are accumulating wealth while improving your skills. With all due respect, wealth accumulation is a lengthy process for ordinary people without capital. Viserys leaned in, intrigued. Go on. Illyrio smiled, sensing Viserys' interest. Take me, for example. It took me nearly half my adult life to earn my first pot of gold. However, it only took 2 or 3 years to earn my second and third pots of gold. The same principle applies to land. It may take generations to acquire the first piece, but once you have it, acquiring more becomes significantly easier. I believe the same holds true for a kingdom. You may need an initial boost. Viserys understood immediately. You mean a starting capital? Exactly, Illyrio nodded. Marriage is a common means of alliance between nobles, much like the proposed marriage between you and Dorne. However, given the current situation. Viserys understood the implication. The alliance might fall through. But if you trust me, I believe I can find a suitable marriage partner for Princess Dany, one who might bring an army as a dowry. Dany, now part of the conversation, blinked nervously. The mention of marriage unsettled her, for she was too young to grasp its full consequences. She bit her lip, trying to keep her composure, remembering Viserys' teachings on maintaining royal composure. Viserys sensed her discomfort but kept his focus on Illyrio. Of course, I've considered this. However, given our current circumstances, finding a suitable match for Dany might be challenging. Dany trembled slightly at Viserys' words, feeling a pang of sorrow at the thought of separation. She had always imagined being with Viserys forever, and now, the idea of parting weighed heavily on her young heart. Viserys, despite his words, had no intention of using Dany as a bargaining chip. His predecessor's approach of trading family for power was something he now disdained. He believed in the value of strength for protection, not just for its own sake. His apparent interest in the marriage was merely to keep Illyrio engaged. As a wealthy magister of Pentos, Illyrio was well versed in Targaryen traditions. To secure his support, Viserys needed to play along. Sure enough, Illyrio approved of Viserys' attitude. Meanwhile, the guard returned with the gift. Wrapped in red silk, its shape was unmistakable, a long bow. The guard placed the gift on the table, and Illyrio himself removed the silk, revealing a black dragon bone bow. The bow, 4 or 5 feet long, was as black as the night sky, curved like a crescent moon, as if crafted from a dragon's rib. It exuded a powerful and mysterious aura. Alongside the bow were 3 replacement strings, a testament to Illyrio's thoughtful preparation. A small token of my appreciation. Please accept it, Prince. Thank you, Illyrio. I accept it with gratitude. Viserys smiled as he picked up the dragon bone bow. Pale blue text appeared in front of his eyes. Dragon bone bow provides 2.58 assignable points. Daily assignable points increase by 0.08. 2.58 points. Is it related to the size? Viserys put his questions aside for the time being. Illyrio was in the dragon bone business. If I could just take a look around his warehouse. He pulled the bowstring without making a sound, drawing it to about 70% of its capacity. This display of strength was impressive for a minor and gave Illyrio a glimpse of Viserys' potential. He carefully supported the bowstring and let it slowly return to its resting position, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Illyrio. This showed his respect and understanding of the weapon, earning him more favor from the merchant. Any bow left unstrung could suffer damage, and as a jeweler and dragon bone merchant, Illyrio appreciated the care Viserys showed. Although the bow was now a gift, it still meant something to him that it would be cherished. The two men chatted a while longer. Illyrio mentioned he had another business meeting to attend, so he didn't stay long. Before leaving, he left Viserys another gift. Viserys couldn't help but marvel at Illyrio's extravagance. Chapter 23, Confession Night, Terrifying Skin Changer. This dragon bone bow only further confirmed Viserys' suspicions. It seemed that contact with dragon products provided assignable points, and continuous contact would keep those points accumulating. As soon as his meeting with Illyrio was over, he opened his panel to check. Every morning, Viserys would add assignable points to his constitution and then reallocate proficiency points from other skills to his swordsmanship. Today, he found that his assignable points had increased from 0 to 2.58. The dragon bone bow had added 2.5 assignable points. With the 0.05 bonus from the dragon bone dagger, the 0.08 from the dragon bone bow, and his original 0.1, his daily assignable points had increased to 0.23, more than doubling his rate of accumulation. With less than 4 months until the 10-day celebration, this meant his constitution could increase by over 20 points, bringing it to at least 80 plus. This would make him a top-notch warrior, greatly increasing his chances of ranking well or even winning the championship. If the prize for the champion of the sword competition was truly a Valyrian steel sword, Viserys would fight for it no matter what. Valyrian steel swords were light, tough, and hard, a holy weapon in the heart of every swordsman. However, he wondered if Bravos would really be willing to give away such a weapon, suspecting there might be some shady dealings behind the scenes. Viserys also planned to participate in the poetry contest. Who says you can't be a copycat in a different world? As an art student, he had heard countless classics, and just one of his poems could spread to every corner of this world. If the prize was indeed a dragon egg, he had to try his hand at it. There was just one problem: To participate in the poetry competition, he needed the approval of someone of a high social standing, unless he was already a famous master and could enter on his own. Otherwise, no matter how good his work was, it would be useless if no one could give him the exposure he needed. The courtesans were very strict with the performers who wanted to use their fame to compete. If they performed well, they could help each other, if not, they wasted the courtesans' resources. Braavos officials took this matter very seriously, as did Highgarden in Westeros, which also had great respect for poets and singers. Thanks to these artists, Highgarden had become the most beautiful castle in the Seven Kingdoms. Even though they were thousands of miles apart, there was a subtle competitive tension between the two. If the prize for the poetry contest was a dragon egg, Viserys would definitely participate. Another great gift Illyrio had left was a large sum of money stored in the Iron Bank. Whether it was a loan or a donation was left unsaid, but Viserys didn't plan to pay him back. He suggested that Illyrio could try his hand at the couch business, which would be profitable enough. The two men understood each other perfectly without saying a word. At dinner, Viserys noticed that Dany was unusually downcast. She picked at her food, barely eating, and responded minimally when he spoke to her. "I'm full," she said, rising from her seat and preparing to go upstairs. "Wait a minute," Viserys called, glancing at the maid standing by and gesturing for her to leave. He understood that Dany's mood was likely due to Illyrio's marriage proposal earlier in the day. As the maid left and the room grew quiet, the candle light flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls. The strange atmosphere made Dany's heart tighten. Viserys looked at her, taking in her downcast purple eyes and the way her silver braids hung down her shoulders and across her chest. Her arms, exposed by the open sleeves of her dress, glowed with a pearly luster. She was the embodiment of exquisitely beautiful. "Dany, will you stay by my side forever?" he asked gently. Dany met his gaze, momentarily stunned by the intensity in his eyes. It's just like you think, just like Aegon and his sisters," Viserys continued. Dany was no longer a child, and she could vaguely understand the implications of his words. A blush spread across her cheeks, and her ears began to burn. Viserys walked up to her and whispered, "I will never use you as a bargaining chip," he said, kissing her forehead lightly. "Wait until you grow up." Dany watched him leave, sitting in the chair for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. It felt as if she had received something precious, and she couldn't help but stamp her feet lightly a few times before finally heading upstairs. During this time, Viserys felt much more at ease. His days were spent at the workshop, and in the evenings, he cherished moments with Dany. He also found time to practice archery, adding a new skill to his repertoire. However, due to the strict laws in Braavos, which prohibited the use of bows and arrows outside the home, he refrained from upgrading his archery skills immediately. He planned to do so later when he joined the sellswords. An incident during a meal brought a serious realization. When a maid reminded Dany to be cautious of hot food, Viserys recognized the potential danger if her identity was ever exposed to the faceless man. This would increase the priority of her assassination. Robert might even consider hiring the faceless men to target Dany. Known for their unpredictability and penchant for considering assassination an art, the faceless men might offer Robert a discount for the chance to eliminate such a unique person. Determined to protect her, Viserys began training Dany to act as though she feared the heat. Without strength, there is no sense of security, he thought, watching her fall asleep. He prepared to use dragon dreams again to gather more information about the assassin. After the first time he actively used dragon dreams to search for information, he noticed his magic had increased by 0.3, bringing it to 19. This was significantly faster than his constitution, which increased by less than 0.1 points per day through diligent exercise. However, the recovery period for using dragon dreams was lengthy, taking 2 or 3 days to fully recuperate. During this time, he felt sluggish, and his efficiency in exercising or practicing swordsmanship was greatly reduced. He mused that in 3 or 4 years, when the tide of magic returned, figures like Melisandre, the Green Seers, and various magical creatures would start to re-emerge, making magic once again a dominant force in the world. For Viserys, physical prowess such as swordsmanship and constitution were essential, so he didn't focus on improving his magic attributes. After lying down, Viserys activated dragon dreams to track down the assassin once again. He figured that after more than 10 days, the assassin might have perished at sea. This time, he planned to quickly confirm the assassin's status and then end the dream promptly. It didn't take long for Viserys to enter the dragon dreams state. He heard the muffled voices of seagulls and the sound of waves overlapping. The sun was slowly sinking into the sea, creating a golden veil. Surprisingly, the assassin was still alive but lying on a sampan like a dead fish, seemingly at death's door. In the next moment, the assassin sprang to life, rolled over, and scooped up a small fish from the water. Viserys was taken aback. No, is this really possible? He thought, his knowledge of survival techniques exceeded. Remembering his past life as a member of the Air Force, he considered taking the assassin as his master for survival skills. With his fishing prowess, the assassin could probably survive another 10 days adrift at sea. The assassin skillfully prepared the fish with his dagger, displaying a certain elegance in his movements. However, Viserys noticed something strange. When the assassin cut open the fish, his body trembled as if he had been punched. His expression also indicated he was enduring some intense pain. Viserys decided not to watch further and interrupted the vision. He opened his panel and saw Magic, 6.1. In less than half a minute, he had used up most of his magic. Fortunately, he stopped in time, avoiding dizziness or loss of cognitive ability. Viserys sat up in bed and looked out the window. It was completely dark outside. It seemed that the range of Dragon Dream's reconnaissance could span different time zones. Maybe, he thought, he could one day find out why this planet always had extreme weather. But for the time being, he put the idea out of his mind and went to his desk. Unbelievable way of fishing, he wrote, it's like a synesthetic response. He began to think deeply about what he had witnessed. Fish react quickly, and if the killer had used a tool to spear them, that would be one thing. But this guy was lying on a paddle boat, catching fish with his bare hands. Speed and precision, both were essential. And with his face to the sky, could it be that this guy had such good hearing that he could locate the fish by sound alone? It seemed impossible. Then there was the synesthesia. Judging from his state, he hadn't been short of food these days. There was an endless supply of sea fish, and he hadn't even lost much weight. But the reaction of shaking when he stabbed the fish was really strange. Could it be some kind of psychological reaction? Or a negative state? Or perhaps a punishment? Killing an animal and being hurt in return, there could only be one explanation, a skin changer. Viserys suddenly felt a chill down his spine. The skin changers in the novel could transfer their consciousness into the body of an animal, possessing their skills and senses. The animals they possessed were called animal companions. Eagles, goats, dogs, dire wolves. One of the more famous skin changers was Bran Stark, who was a wolf spirit and the heir to the three-eyed raven. He could transfer his consciousness not only to his own dire wolf but also to Hodder. In addition, Jon and a bunch of wildlings beyond the wall were also skin changers. The information about skin changers noted that if their animal companion died, they would also be affected. If the host died, the consciousness would be trapped in the animal. The assassin's reaction after killing the fish was remarkably similar to that of a skin changer. Judging from the current situation, the assassin was able to capture an animal companion in a short period of time. And after killing the animal companion, he could continue to withstand the effects of its death. This indicated he might be a high-level skin changer. A very high-level one. With such a strong ability to invade consciousness, could he directly invade people's minds? Viserys pounded the table with some anxiety and cursed in a low voice, "Damn it! Robert, that fucking lickspittle, where the hell did he find such a fucking cheater?" Comment. 5 comment. Vote. Chapter 24, Chapter 24, Temple of the Moonsingers. He must never be allowed to go ashore. Viserys felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead at the thought of the assassin's demonstrated abilities. Skin changers are terrifying. They can completely control animals to assassinate or poison without leaving any trace. Their skills are as formidable as his own dragon dreams. But Viserys quickly calmed himself. First of all, such a powerful assassin is unlikely to be at the command of just anyone. Otherwise, it would be a waste to use him for an assassination attempt on someone like himself. If the assassin worked for Robert, then why not use him to solve his debt problems first? Robert's bias against the Westerlands could have been exploited to get rid of Cersei and even the Old Lion, Tywin. And if the assassin belonged to Littlefinger or Varys, it would be even more impossible. These two don't trust easily. Littlefinger has always been scheming to rise to power. To kill Jon Arryn, the foster father of Ned and Robert, he had to manipulate his mistress, Lisa. And who knows what Varys is up to? If Varys could control such a powerful skin changer, he would have already taken advantage of it. so it is very likely that the true extent of the assassin's abilities is not known to others. This makes Viserys a little worried. Calming his emotions, he realized that since he had dragon dreams, he didn't need to worry too much. Although the assassin's methods are more bizarre, Viserys has the advantage of foresight. If the assassin does make it to Braavos, he can prepare in advance and even arrange an ambush. The odds of winning are still in his favor. For now, Viserys decided to visit the temples of Braavos to see if there were any clues to increasing his magic power. His first choice was the Temple of the Moonsingers. Before Braavos was built, it was the Moonsingers who led the slaves escaping the Valyrian Empire to find this sanctuary of prophecy. And prophecy is real in the world of Game of Thrones. Since they can predict the future, it means that this group of people has some real power. In the original story, the Moonsinger taught Dany the song of childbirth. Perhaps there are other songs, so Viserys decided to take advantage of his free time and visit. Dany practices swordsmanship very hard every day, so Viserys decided to give her a break and take her along. "Where are we going?" Dany asked excitedly. The last time she went out with Viserys was to buy fish. "Let's go to the Moonsinger temple, bring some money." "Okay," she replied enthusiastically. She changed into a light blue dress, tied her silver white hair into a pigtail, and let it fall behind her head. Viserys couldn't help but notice how well light-colored clothes complemented their hair and skin tones. In a world where everything seems a bit dirty and dark, the two of them quickly became the focus of attention wherever they went. The siblings got into the carriage and, after half an hour, passed an arch bridge, catching sight of the Temple of the Moonsingers in the distance. Dany, sitting in the carriage, lifted the curtain and looked out with her purple eyes. She immediately recognized the white building as the Temple of the Moonsingers. The all-white temple stood out prominently among the other structures. It was the largest temple in Braavos, built to honor and thank the Moonsingers. The grand marble palace was topped with a large silver-white dome, surrounded by milky white glass windows depicting the different phases of the moon. As they stepped out of the carriage, they saw a pair of marble statues of maidens standing guard at the temple's main gate. The spotless stone slabs at their feet added to the feeling of tranquility and holiness. A beautiful woman, accompanied by a maid, emerged from the temple and happened to meet the siblings. "What a beautiful girl! I hope my child will be as beautiful as her," the woman said softly, touching her slightly swollen belly. "That's for sure, Lady Mephis. Your beauty will be passed on to your child," the maid replied, bringing a pleased smile to the lady's face. Lady Mephis then noticed that Dany was standing next to a young man. Observing their similar features, she guessed they were siblings. "That young man is also very handsome," she remarked. Viserys nodded slightly to the woman, and Dany smiled back, her purple eyes as bright as jewels, melting the woman's heart. She gestured to the maid standing beside her, who approached the siblings and said, Lord, Lady Mephis would like to have a word with you. Is this a convenient time?" "Of course," Viserys replied. The maid led them to Lady Mephis. Viserys observed that the lady, likely in her mid-twenties, appeared pregnant. Her round face and flushed cheeks hinted at her condition, though there was a hint of greyish-white on her blush. The slightly bulging belly suggested she was drawn to Dany by overflowing maternal love. So the so-called Temple of the Moonsingers is actually a temple for women, and this is where they tie up dolls, Viserys thought to himself. He then approached the noblewoman and said, "Lady, your beauty adorns this city." "Oh, your praise is like a spring breeze," she replied with a gracious smile, "but I must admit, the beauty of you and your sister evokes a bit of jealousy." Dany blushed shyly, realizing that the lady was praising her. This reaction only endeared her more to the noblewoman, who immediately removed a bracelet adorned with colorful gemstones from her wrist and offered it to Dany. The bracelet, crafted from gold and studded with pigeon egg-sized gemstones, was undoubtedly expensive. Viserys initially wanted to decline out of politeness, but the noblewoman's extravagance made him decide otherwise. Dany glanced at Viserys, seeking his approval. Seeing his encouraging nod, she lifted the hem of her skirt, bowed in thanks, and allowed the noblewoman to clasp the bracelet around her wrist. For an 8-year-old, the bracelet was too large, and Dany had to bend her arm to keep it from slipping off. The noblewoman, seemingly pleased by the encounter, left shortly after, her servant helping her into a beautiful carriage. Viserys noted the depiction of two hands on the back of the carriage and recognized it as the Zalane House crest. Zalane House was one of the 3 great houses of Braavos, along with House Targaryen, from which the current Sea Lord hailed, and House Frigger. Though the Sea Lord was nominally chosen from the entire population of Bravus, in practice, almost all came from these 3 houses. Who says good looks don't pay the bills? This is how you pay the bills, Viserys thought with a smirk. After checking the bracelet to ensure it was genuine, he took Daenerys' hand and led her into the temple. Chapter 25, Song of the Moon. After entering the temple, Viserys and Daenerys were struck by the pristine whiteness of the walls, dome, and statues. Sunlight filtered through windows representing different phases of the moon, creating a beautiful circle of light on the ground, giving the impression of a magical circle beneath their feet. This enchanting effect added to the temple's serene and otherworldly atmosphere. The 3 statues of goddesses at the front of the temple were the most eye-catching. Carved from marble, each statue stood 4 or 5 meters tall, reminiscent of the grandeur of the statue of David that Viserys had seen in his previous life. The central goddess held a book and wore a hood, while the 2 goddesses on either side, slightly shorter, held a sword and a lamp respectively. To the right of these statues stood a yellow wooden donation box, where visitors would place money after praying. Viserys noticed someone praying silently before the statues, hands clasped in reverence. Not wanting to disturb the worshipper, he led Daenerys to explore the murals depicting the legends of the moon singers. One mural caught Daenerys' attention. "Brother, look, the moon is cracking," she whispered. "Cracking?" Viserys followed her gaze and saw that the moon in the mural indeed appeared to have a crack running through it. At first glance, it looked like a flaw in the wall, but on closer inspection, it was clear the moon was intentionally depicted as cracked. Viserys recalled the Valyrian legends of dragons emerging from a split moon and wondered why this well-known story wasn't depicted in the mural. Perhaps there was another explanation, but he decided to leave that mystery for another time. Once the prayer group left, Viserys led Daenerys to the statue of the central goddess. Nearby, a tall, thin holy sister wearing a white hood stood attentively, responding to the worshippers based on their donations. Her gaze lingered on the striking siblings as they approached. Viserys nodded slightly at the holy sister, who seemed captivated by his presence. He closed his eyes, furrowing his brow to convey a sense of deep worry. He knew she would be watching, and to engage her in a meaningful conversation, he needed to leverage the power of his money. Of course, his intention was purely to gain insight and help, not anything untoward. After about 2 or 3 minutes, Viserys approached the yellow donation box. He took a handful of gold coins from his pocket and dropped them into the box through the round hole in the lid. The holy sister's eyes lit up at the sight of the generous donation. She was struck by the young man's handsome appearance and apparent wealth. Clearly, something was troubling him, and she felt compelled to offer her assistance. As Viserys turned away from the box, the holy sister approached him. She first drew a circle on her chest, a gesture used by the moon singers, and then said, "May the goddess guide us." "May the goddess guide us," Viserys responded in kind. "I noticed your solemn expression while you were praying. Have you encountered a problem? If you have a family member traveling far away, I have a song of protection. If you have a wife giving birth, I have a song of childbirth. If you are confused about something, I have a song of guidance." Viserys slightly bowed and replied, "Thank you for your kindness. We don't have any relatives traveling far away. My sister and I are each other's only family." The holy sister's eyes widened in surprise. She had assumed that the well-dressed siblings must be from a large, affluent family, but now realized they were orphans. This incorrect assumption made her feel a bit embarrassed. "I don't have a wife either," Viserys continued, "but as for the confusion." Seeing an opportunity to use her skills, the holy sister interjected, "Please, tell me what is troubling you." Viserys looked embarrassed, hesitating before speaking. "Actually, I don't know how to explain it. I've been having strange dreams lately, and I feel dizzy and exhausted when I wake up. I'm worried that I might have a strange disease, but the healer told me that my body is in perfect health. So, I came to seek the goddess's guidance." The holy sister pondered his words. It didn't seem like a psychological issue that her usual talking therapy could address, but she didn't want to turn Viserys away without trying to help. "Is that so? I wonder if you could stay a little longer so I can fetch something that might help you," she suggested. "Thank you very much," Viserys replied, watching as the holy sister walked past the statue and through a small door. Everything Viserys had just said entered Daenerys' ears. She always thought that her brother was an inexhaustible well of energy, waking up before she opened her eyes and falling asleep after she closed them. She never imagined that Viserys would have such a problem with his body, and the realization made her very worried. She couldn't help but blame herself. 5 minutes later, the Holy Sister returned, holding a thin booklet in her hand. Lord, I think it may be the things in your dreams that are troubling you. This is the moon song of the moon chanting temple. Chanting it under the moonlight will bring peace of mind and may help you. Viserys looked at the booklet, noticing it was slightly yellowed, as if the Holy Sister had used it herself. This must be your personal item. It's too precious, I don't think I can accept it. The Holy Sister smiled warmly, pulling the fine lines at the corners of her mouth, which made people feel at ease. Don't worry, I've memorized the contents. Consider it a gift. A gift. This. Viserys hesitated before accepting the booklet, and subconsciously activated his panel. To his surprise, when his hand touched the booklet, his magic value immediately recovered by 5 points. It seemed to be a good thing. Realizing that the trip was worthwhile, Viserys touched himself and found that he was a little short on funds. Then he said apologetically, I'm sorry, but I think I'll be back soon. Can I talk to you again then? The Holy Sister smiled and said, of course, that's not a problem. However, her eyes glanced at the bracelet on Dany's hand, understanding that her little scrapbook was not worth that. Chapter 26, Song of the Moon 2. After realizing the value of the Song of the Moon, Viserys decided to return to his residence with Dany. On the way, he discovered that the booklet contained about 3,000 words, with the main content being praise and worship of the moon. The text was written in Valyrian and had a beautiful rhythm, making it more of a chant with tones. It also required visualization of the moonlight while reading, which added a level of difficulty. As Viserys was engrossed in reading, Dany asked him, Brother, have you been dreaming a lot lately? Haha, I'm fine, Viserys replied, feeling a warmth in his heart as he petted her head, realizing she was worried about him. Dany, however, secretly resolved to remind him to rest more from that day on. In the evening, Viserys found the moonlight particularly beautiful. The silver light scattered on the ground, creating a tranquil atmosphere. With the Song of the Moon in hand, Viserys climbed to a high place and began singing softly as instructed. He glanced at his magic value, which was currently 11.6. Following the prayer in the booklet, Viserys began to chant. The bright moon is in the sky, and its light shines on the stars. The moonlight is like a shadow, the moonlight is like water. As he recited, he felt a cool energy flow into his body. The tiredness in his spirit was relieved, and his mood became more tranquil and indifferent. After about a quarter of an hour, Viserys checked his panel and found that his magic value had recovered by 2 points, reaching 13.6. Viserys was very surprised. The recovery rate of his magic was several times faster. This meant he could use dragon dreams more frequently, giving him a better chance against the assassin. He continued to recite, and this time his magic value increased again, reaching 15.2. It seems to be recovering a little slower, he thought. He calculated that the recovery effect had decreased by about 20%, meaning he could recover about 6 points of magic in an hour, and even less in the second hour. But one night was enough to fully restore his magic. Viserys continued to sing, and after 3 hours, his magic had fully recovered. It seems the upper limit of my magic power hasn't increased. Maybe I didn't sing long enough. Viserys pondered. However, he realized that in addition to restoring his magic points, the chant also seemed to replenish his energy. It was almost 1 a.m., but he wasn't sleepy at all. Instead, his mind was sharp and active. Wait, if the Temple of the Moonsingers has such powerful benefits, what about the Temple of the Lord of Light? Viserys suddenly realized he had stumbled upon a treasure trove of opportunities. In the novels, the first mage, Melisandre, who serves the human side, worships the Lord of Light. If the Temple of the Moonsingers offered such advantages, then surely the Temple of the Lord of Light had even more to offer. Besides these two, Bravus also had the Temple of the Father of Waters, the Holy Refuge, and the infamous House of Black and White. While the last one might be difficult to access, the first two were open to those who could pay. There may be other treasures in the Temple of the Moonsingers too, Viserys thought. The Song of the Moon seemed like the basic martial arts techniques from the novels of his past life. If there was a basic exercise method for outsiders, there must be an advanced method for insiders. This visit to the Temple of the Moonsingers had cost the siblings over 30 gold dragons, but high-end items would undoubtedly cost more. We need to make money, and we need it quickly. Viserys' intuition told him he was in a period of low magic. The heads of the various temples probably didn't value these things highly, and as long as one was willing to pay, they could be obtained. However, he needed funds now, but he couldn't hastily touch Illyrio's money. It was a strategic reserve meant to keep the other side in check. Drawing from it too soon would make him appear desperate and potentially deceitful. It was wiser to let the money sit in the Iron Bank for a while longer. The next 2 days, Viserys took advantage of the good weather and the moonlight every night, planning to have Dany practice the moon song with him. However, he overlooked one problem: Dany was now considered half-literate, and there were many words she didn't understand or didn't even know. During their time in Braavos, the siblings were brought there by Sir Willem Darry, who unfortunately passed away a few years later. Dany was still very young then and couldn't learn much during those years. Her current education was almost like pre-childhood education, so Viserys had to hire another tutor to teach her to read and write properly. Viserys took the opportunity to write down some of his past life's knowledge in Chinese characters so that he would not forget it. Among the most important information were the plot points of the original novel, including various major events and the fates of the characters. Of course, this included the parts relevant to Dany. That's why he didn't teach her Chinese. Viserys enjoyed reading history books before his journey, as history often provided solutions to current problems. He would tell Dany stories from his world, changing the names and details, which also helped him deepen his understanding of those tales. Dany was surprised to find that Viserys' storytelling skills had improved significantly, moving beyond the simple once-upon-a-time formula. Thanks to the whale oil candles from the workshop, their nights were much brighter and more enjoyable. These candles produced little smoke, burned brightly, and lasted a long time, enriching the siblings' nighttime activities. Unlike before, when they could only count the stars, often obscured by Braavos' frequent fog, they now had plenty of light to read and write by. One evening, Viserys decided to take a break and was telling Dany the story of the Little Mermaid. Just as they reached the crucial moment when Ariel traded her voice for legs, Helbo sent a letter for Viserys, appearing to have something important to discuss. Though worried about the fate of the Little Mermaid, Dany obediently sat to the side. "Lord Viserys, this is a letter from Helbo," the servant said, handing over the envelope. Viserys took the envelope and gently tore it open. The letter was brief. "Lord Viserys, I have invited the Morel to discuss payment at my residence tomorrow. Please be there. Also, the prize for the poetry competition has been confirmed, a dragon egg." Needless to say, Viserys was excited about the dragon egg. Although everyone believed that dragons were extinct and could no longer hatch, the egg still held high ornamental and collection value. Illyrio was in the dragon egg business, so it was plausible that Braavos or the Sea Lord's palace could use it as a prize. There was a possibility that they might use the dragon egg as a gimmick and secretly take it back later, but Viserys couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. To win the dragon egg, he needed to find a way to contact Lady Moonshadow and become her minstrel. It was said that Lady Moonshadow was not easily accessible to ordinary people, so he had to devise a plan to reach her. While the dragon egg prize was almost confirmed, the Valyrian steel sword was another matter. Such a weapon was truly magical, and it was uncertain if the Sea Lord's palace would be able to offer it as a prize. Helbo's invitation to the banquet had another motive, to get Viserys to help secure as much money as possible. Recently, a production accident occurred at the workshop. A newly recruited worker caused a small fire due to his lack of skill, resulting in the loss of hundreds of pounds of whale oil and several candle molds. The skilled workers had been lured away by another candle workshop offering higher salaries. It was evident that a powerful force with abundant financial resources was backing the rival workshop, intending to destroy Morel's business. Helbo was not particularly concerned about Morel's workshop's future, but he was worried about getting paid. Morel had the backing of Lady Moonshadow, making it difficult for Helbo to provoke him. Viserys guessed that Morel might use his assets to pay off his debts, possibly converting some whale oil into money. "Whale oil," Viserys muttered, repeating the words over and over until something clicked. Whale oil is animal fat. Besides being edible and used for lighting, it can also be used to make soap. Suddenly excited, Viserys grabbed a pen and paper and started jotting down his thoughts. Dany, standing nearby, tried to peek over his shoulder but couldn't understand the strange square characters he was using. Viserys still hadn't taught her this language. As he wrote, Viserys became more animated, filling 4 or 5 sheets of paper before finally stopping. He looked over the stack of papers with satisfaction, as if he could see flowers blooming on the pages. "Dany," Viserys said happily, turning to her. "We'll soon have a dragon egg." Chapter 27, how to turn 1 pound of gold into 2. The father and son were close to a desperate gamble. They had sold not only some of the family's most prized possessions but also a large number of shares to Lady Falia. All they wanted was to secure a significant share in the upcoming 10-day festival, 3 months later. However, as the saying goes, misfortune never comes alone. Helbo had invited the father and son to a banquet, and the implications were clear. They needed to find a way to stabilize this volatile situation. On their way to the mansion, they encountered Viserys. Both father and son felt a chill. Viserys was now the most dynamic member of Helbo's inner circle. He could transform from a reassuring ally into a dangerous adversary at any moment, putting them under immense pressure. Master Morel, Viserys greeted from his carriage. Lord Viserys, Morel responded, trying to maintain his composure. After exchanging greetings, they fell into a brief, tense silence. Morel managed to stay calm, but young Rabbi was on pins and needles. The sight of the dozen or so corpses kept haunting him. He had dealt with the aftermath of those deaths himself, a memory he could never forget. The thought of becoming one of them made his desperation grow. Helbo mentioned he had some fine wine, quite exciting, Morel finally said, trying to break the silence with an insignificant comment. Viserys took it as a simple greeting and replied, then let's hurry and get to the banquet early. Yes. Good. Rabbi echoed, almost too eagerly. Viserys urged his driver to speed up, leaving the anxious father and son behind. Rabbi watched the dust kicked up by Viserys' carriage ahead of him, feeling a profound sense of desolation. He believed that, in Viserys' eyes, they had already become the party being pursued for payment. Remembering the fish-eater incident only deepened his dread, causing his hands and feet to grow colder. To calm himself, Rabbi clung to the thought that Lady Falia had a stake in the workshop, and Helbo wouldn't dare push them too far. This gave him a fragile sense of security. However, he was well aware that Falia owned many properties and it was unclear how much help they could provide. They were essentially using Falia's name to gain leverage against Helbo, who was unaware of the true extent of Faria's involvement. As these thoughts churned in his mind, they arrived at Helbo's mansion. Helbo, accompanied by a young accountant, greeted them. Contrary to what they expected, Helbo had not prepared a full banquet, but had set out some wine and refreshments in the living room. Helbo's attention first went to Viserys, about to speak, but noticing Morel and Rabbi behind him, he let them settle in first. Viserys, however, had his own agenda and didn't quite agree with Helbo's plan. Though he worked for Helbo, the nature of their relationship would soon change. Everyone took their seats, and Helbo got straight to the point. Master Morel, I heard there was an incident at the workshop recently. How is it being handled? Morel quickly replied, thank you for your concern. It has been dealt with properly and will not affect subsequent production. That's great. Helbo raised his voice. Let's toast to the workshop. After a few drinks, Helbo continued, Master Morel, it is an honor to work with you this time, thanks to Lord Viserys, of course. Morel and Rabbi raised their glasses to thank Viserys, who acknowledged them with a nod. Our cooperation will end in a few days, and I hope to receive some payment in advance. I know this is a bit rude, but I can reduce the amount, Helbo said, spreading his hands helplessly. I believe you understand that we are responsible for many people. Here it comes, Morel and Rabbi thought, feeling a sinking sensation in their stomachs. They knew this was Helbo's test, and their future depended on today. In reality, the money they had was far from enough, as almost all of it had been invested back into the workshop. They hoped to buy time until the first batch of goods was delivered, which might give them some breathing room. What they really needed was for Helbo to agree to delay the payment a little longer. Morel looked troubled and said, I'm really sorry, Master Helbo. We have obligations to others as well, and I understand your position. Rest assured, as soon as the first batch of goods is delivered, we will pay your fee as soon as possible. Yes, as soon as possible, Rabbi added, trying to sound convincing. Viserys touched his chin, observing Helbo's changing expression. He watched with interest as Helbo continued, oh, is that so? I've heard some troubling rumors recently that the skilled workers in your workshop have all left. When exactly will the first batch of goods be delivered? The father and son exchanged uneasy glances before forcing smiles. A little over a month, 2 at the most, Morel replied. So after the celebration? If that's the case, I'll have to charge interest, and Helbo said seriously, I may also need some collateral. Collateral? I wonder what you think we can use as collateral? Morel asked, feeling a sense of dread. Helbo raised his glass, swirling the red liquid inside thoughtfully. The candle workshop. I believe the whale oil is the most valuable asset you have. But whale oil is the raw material for making candles. Without whale oil, Rabbi began to protest, but Morel quickly silenced him. Whale oil is indeed valuable. I wonder how much you think is appropriate as collateral, Morel asked, his voice tight with anxiety. How much do you have? Helbo inquired. About 700 pounds, Morel replied. Then 500 pounds, Helbo said decisively. Morel felt a pang of despair. Mortgaging 500 pounds would leave them with only 200 pounds, making the production of the first batch of goods quite tight. Helbo's real intention was to sell their collateral to another candle workshop. If it weren't for Falaya's involvement, he would have taken it all without hesitation. Just as Morel and his son were about to argue, a voice like the sound of nature rang out. Helbo, I'm not in a hurry for my share. If my share is temporarily set aside, I think we should leave 350 pounds of whale oil for the workshop. Rabbi looked at Viserys with gratitude, never expecting that this god of death in his heart would turn out to be such a considerate person. 350 pounds would make the production of the first batch of goods much easier. Morel, more seasoned and perceptive, saw the unexpected defection at the negotiating table. It was surprising that Viserys would directly oppose Helbo in such a manner. Helbo, meanwhile, glanced at Viserys with some displeasure but quickly masked his irritation. What's wrong with him? What is this kid doing? Viserys continued in a calm, confident tone, however, I have two conditions. Chapter 28, Helbo, stupid. Viserys had no plans to consult Helbo first. He hadn't even thought about it. He had seen high-ranking officials laugh and scold, and he had seen billionaires spit out their words. All that etiquette was meaningless to him. As long as he could steadily bring benefits, he would naturally have followers. Between himself and Helbo, it was called cooperation, but it was really just a job. Now that Viserys had the skills and the capital, why would he work for someone else? Despite Helbo's disapproving look and Morel's confusion, Viserys stated his conditions. However, I have two conditions. Please go on, Morel said eagerly. If there was a rift between Viserys and Helbo, it might be his chance. First, I hope you can provide me with a venue. I have some ideas I want to try. Yes. That's no problem. Morel agreed very quickly, and even his bald head, which had become a little grey due to repeated blows, seemed to brighten a bit. Helbo, on the other hand, gulped down a few more drinks. If Viserys didn't stand on his side, he wouldn't dare make such an outrageous demand. 350 pounds, he estimated that he would only get 200 pounds at the end of the day. As for Viserys' share, he said that he didn't need to worry about it if he didn't want it for the time being. Second, I need you to introduce me to Lady Falaya. Helbo glanced at Viserys, the corner of his mouth curling up in a mocking arc. He realized what Viserys was trying to do. He probably wanted to take a chance on this opportunity and then own his own business. Helbo couldn't figure out why Viserys would want to do that. He knew how much money Viserys had. That amount might be enough to maintain a relatively decent life. But if he wanted to do something significant, he should give up on it as soon as possible. And his so-called ideas? There were many people in Bravos with ideas, and more ideas came out every day than fish in the sea. What was his reason? Helbo thought that Viserys was ruining his own good today. But considering Viserys' might, he could endure it for now. However, he then thought it might not be a bad idea. When Viserys had been rejected and lost all his money, he would be in a better position to deal with him. Besides, could he just see Falaya of Moonshadow whenever he wanted? With this thought, Helbo relaxed and turned to observe Morel's response with a relaxed attitude. After hearing Viserys' request, Morel's brows, which had just begun to relax, furrowed again. He thought for a moment and said, I can introduce you, but Lady Falaya's schedule seems to be very full, and I've only met her 3 times. In fact, Morel had never met her in person. He had always negotiated with Falaya's housekeeper. Of course, if it was at a banquet, he had seen her from a distance once. Falaya has the title of Moonshadow, so she always wears a veil in public. Morel has seen Falaya's person, but not her face. Rounding off is the same as never seeing. Helbo chuckled a little but didn't say anything. No problem, just remember to mention my name. Helbo sneered inwardly, thinking, mention your name. The Beggar King's name. Morel stayed silent. He only knew that Viserys was on his side now. Yes, when would you like to meet her? I'll let you know. The meeting had a relatively satisfactory outcome, at least for Viserys and Morel. Helbo undoubtedly prolonged the meeting, but Viserys went directly to the workshop with Morel afterward. Helbo saw them off at the gate, watching them leave impassively. The incident was not a big deal, but it was not a small one either. Of course, Viserys' might was a significant factor. Once they arrived at the workshop, Morel immediately found a suitable and tidy place for Viserys. All kinds of equipment were available, and Viserys was very satisfied. He first asked someone to buy all the materials for him and then specially entrusted a patrolman to be the caretaker. Considering the issue of confidentiality, Viserys did almost everything himself. The others only had to help with the rough work. At first, Rabbi was a little curious, wondering what Viserys was doing with the blankets. But under his father's tutelage, he immediately got down to the business of making candles and didn't ask any more questions. Viserys planned to make some samples first, and the materials he needed were not many. Things like whale oil were taken directly from the warehouse, and Morel and his son didn't say anything. From morning to afternoon, Viserys was busy for most of the day and finally got results. Looking at the thick, mushy substance in the cauldron, which looked like thick rice porridge, Viserys knew he had succeeded. All that was left was to let it sit for a while. As for the subsequent drying process, it would take too long, so he would probably consider the more expensive drying method. Once his technology was recognized, he could standardize the process. Afterwards, Viserys asked about the value of the workshop, which was around 30,000 gold dragons. Lady Falia had a 40% share. After some gentle prodding from Viserys, he learned from Rabbi that Lady Falia seemed intent on keeping the candle workshop. It seemed that the workshop was also very important to her. This gave Viserys more confidence in meeting Falia, who was known as the Moon Shadow. Even if he used the drying method, Viserys estimated that it would take half a month to wait for the first soap to be formed. During this time, he mainly practiced water dancing. Dany learned the full set, while Viserys focused on mastering the steps. This allowed Viserys' sword skills to improve rapidly. Swordsmanship, Master, 2164/10,000, plus. There are still more than 2 months, which is more than enough time, he thought. Recently, Viserys had not only maintained his sword skills but also started to learn archery. With the help of the system's point cleaning function, he quickly reached the proficient level. One day, Viserys passively triggered Dragon Dreams. It seemed that the assassin had settled in a hotel in Braavos. In the past, Viserys' strength was limited, and he could only trigger Dragon Dreams passively when the enemy arrived, allowing him to escape. But now he had considerable strength. Looking at the entire Braavos, even the Sea Lord's escort swordsman could barely match him in a fight. That night, Viserys donned his black cloak, glanced at Dany sleeping, and then disappeared into the night. Tonight, he was going to show the assassin what it meant to be a guest in his own home. Chapter 29, The Themed Brothel. Viserys' Dragon Dreams were not yet strong enough to be directly targeted. This time, the information he obtained through a passive Dragon Dream was not entirely accurate. However, while his magical abilities might be limited, his reasoning skills were not. Although Braavos is vast, certain key locations serve as transportation hubs and gathering points. By process of elimination, he could narrow down the possibilities. First, Purple Harbor, the largest seaport in Braavos, only allows local ships to dock. Its taverns and inns cater exclusively to locals unless someone particularly wealthy or powerful arrives. Given that the assassin had been at sea for more than 10 days, it was unlikely he would be found there. Thus, Purple Harbor was ruled out. The most likely place was Ragman's Harbor, adjacent to Purple Harbor, which specializes in receiving outsiders. Among the inns there was the Inn of the Green Eel. In the original story, Sam, Jon Snow's good friend, had once visited it, as had Arya Stark. The inn was known for its diversity, with foreigners speaking various languages. It seemed the perfect hiding spot for an assassin who had come to kill Viserys and his sister. Viserys chartered an inconspicuous boat with a silver moon coin to take him to the vicinity of Ragman's Harbor. He was determined to go straight to the Inn of the Green Eel. As a bustling commercial city, Braavos had no concept of a curfew. The docks were always active, with porters working night shifts to earn more. Upon arriving at the docks, Viserys observed a group of porters hauling cargo ships. They shouted in unison, straining against the weight in the dark waters. From a distance, they seemed to be swallowed by the Black Sea. Viserys stepped ashore to the sound of the waves lapping against the shore. Near Ragman's harbour was a place called the Cattery. Despite its name, it was not a house for cats but a brothel with a feline theme. The employees wore fake cat ears and imitated the sounds of female cats mating calls to lure in passers-by. Their voices could make a man's bones melt. Viserys quickly rubbed his face and left the area, muttering, "Normal reaction, normal reaction." He took several deep breaths of the sea air to calm himself before entering the Inn of the Green Eel. The Inn of the Green Eel was the largest inn in the area, with a spacious interior. Each pillar was adorned with 2 or 3 candlesticks, and the inn used whale oil candles, making it exceptionally bright. Most areas were clearly visible, and 5 or 6 female waitresses served wine. Some guests, notably the rascals, pinched them on the buttocks, but the waitresses did not resist, knowing such guests gave more tips. Viserys surveyed the bustling inn, noting the diverse crowd of at least 100 people. The clientele was a mix of locals, Westerosi, and even 2 Dothraki with curved swords at their backs. Judging by their short braids, the Dothraki appeared to have lost more battles than they had won, indicating they were far from the fearsome warriors typically associated with their kind. Finding the assassin in such a crowd would be no easy task. Viserys noticed 3 main groups of people engaged in conversation, 1 speaking the common tongue and 2 speaking Valyrian. Dressed as a sailor with a brown turban, Viserys blended in well and did not attract much attention. He first approached the group speaking the common tongue. They were discussing the rebellion in the Iron Islands a few years ago, a topic unlikely to interest an assassin from Westeros. He then moved to the 2 groups speaking Valyrian, but they were engrossed in discussions about the upcoming 10-day celebration. Realizing the assassin would not be among those discussing local gossip, Viserys ordered a glass of wine and found a vantage point where he could observe the inn. He systematically evaluated the patrons, trying to identify anyone suspicious. 2 men dressed in flamboyant clothes, like roosters in a chicken coop, were clearly local water dancers and could be ruled out. Several vendors with large packages seemed equally unlikely to be assassins, given their demeanor and habits. Viserys quickly realized this method of identification was inefficient. A skilled assassin would be adept at camouflage. Deciding on a bolder approach, he chose to lure the snake out of its hole. Anyone showing an interest in the Beggar King would be highly suspicious. Viserys beckoned to a waitress, a girl of about 17. She had a slightly plumper figure than average and wore a knowing smile. Viserys took her hand, and though she pretended to pull away, he slipped her a handful of gold dragons. "Please buy everyone a drink," he said in a flirty tone. "Tell them it's a treat from the sailor Sinbad, who wants to hear stories about the Beggar King. The rest is yours." The waitress's heartbeat quickened at the sight of the little yellow treasures in her hand. She took another look at the sailor Sinbad and found the facial features behind his beard quite handsome. Her resistance melted away. She nodded, slipping a gold dragon into her sleeve, and made her way to the bar. The innkeeper, a bald man in his 40s with a prominent double chin from years of indulgent drinking, lingered behind the bar. Seeing someone pay for a round of drinks brought a gleam to his eye, it meant higher turnover. He took out a golden-colored copper cup and tapped it with a spoon. Ding 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 ding. The spoon hitting the cup created a crisp sound, and the inn immediately fell silent as everyone turned their attention to the bar. The innkeeper pointed in Viserys' direction and announced, "Everyone, our sailor, Lord Sinbad, would like to offer everyone a drink. Let's raise our glasses to him. To Sinbad! To Sinbad!" The patrons cheered. It was always good to drink for free, and they raised their glasses in the direction indicated by the innkeeper. Viserys nodded in acknowledgement. The innkeeper continued, "Lord Sinbad would like to know something about the Beggar King. I wonder if anyone can tell us about him." Chapter 30, Viserys' Reputation. Ding ding. A similar sound of knocking came from somewhere in the inn. A young man, dressed decently, stood up. His cuffs were tight and neat, and his high, straight nose gave him an air of authority. "Everyone, I know a little about this Beggar King, Lord Sinbad," he said, raising his cup to Viserys before looking around the room to begin his story. "The Beggar King, whose real name is Viserys Targaryen, is a descendant of the fallen royalty of Westeros. Many know this, and he is called the Beggar King because, almost a year ago, he sold his mother's crown and invited a group of sellswords to a banquet, hoping they would help him restore his kingdom." The young man paused for a moment, a hint of pride flashing in his eyes. The banquet was called the Banquet of the Crown, and I was lucky enough to be there. You see, sellswords are businessmen, and they didn't think that the poor Beggar King could fulfill his promise, so they laughed at him mercilessly. I remember the leader of the fist sellsword laughing at him, calling him a child looking for milk everywhere. He smiled at Viserys, who forced a polite smile in return. Viserys thought to himself, this is what it means to be a bully. Most people didn't know the details of that banquet, but now they do. Viserys chose to hold himself down except this unpleasant matter, but soon the sound of clinking glasses was heard again. A short, stocky man stood up. Due to his height, some spectators in the distance didn't even see him at first. His neck was so thick that it was almost the same size as his head. Ahem, Lord, what you said is all history. In fact, this Beggar King is actually quite capable, the short, stocky man said, standing on his tiptoes and waving at Viserys before beginning his tale. I don't know if you remember the Fierce Fish Company, but this Beggar King almost single-handedly wiped out the entire group. It was a few months ago, and the Beggar King had no money, so he used his sister as collateral. His sister was very beautiful, so the creditor agreed. But when the time came and he couldn't pay, the creditor sent someone to collect the debt and wanted to take his sister away by force. After that, the Beggar King killed them all. It was said that the situation was very tragic, and the blood that flowed out overflowed the alley. My goodness! Someone exclaimed. How many people did he kill? Another asked. Why wasn't he arrested? Yet another wondered. Compared to the initial ridicule, the public's opinion of Viserys had changed somewhat. They were shocked by his brutality and disgusted by his behavior of not paying his debts. Most of those disgusted were locals. However, the two Dothraki were quite excited, thinking that such a person was a true warrior. And that is why the Beggar King has earned the name Fish Eater of the Fierce. The burly man continued, then told the crowd about how Viserys had worked in the workshop as a laborer. This burly guy seemed to like using exaggerated expressions. He said that the gutter had turned red. Although it was exaggerated, the voices that despised Viserys for not paying his debts disappeared, replaced by amazement that Bravus had produced another fierce man. The two Dothraki were even more excited. They pounded their chests and let out strange roars, attracting the attention of the others. The first two people had already said everything they could say, and Viserys thanked everyone and then got up to leave. In fact, while the short man was telling the story, Viserys had been observing the others out of the corner of his eye. He had noticed that because the two men were talking so vividly, he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He decided to hang around outside for a while. If the assassin was in the inn, he would probably follow him. If not, he would go to the next place. If the assassin understood the essence of reimbursement, he might have to go to the cattery. Viserys slowed down and walked down a small road with few people. After walking for half an hour without seeing anyone following him, he decided to go somewhere else. Just as Viserys was about to leave, an old woman wrapped in a grayish-blue shawl and hunched over appeared. At first glance, she looked like a giant prawn. As the old woman passed him, Viserys felt something was wrong but couldn't put his finger on it. Watching her disappear around the corner, Viserys finally realized what it was. It was the smell. An old woman shouldn't smell so strongly of the sea. He thought back to the dream he had had, in which the assassin seemed to have been caught in a storm and had been adrift at sea for days. He hurried after her, only to find that the old woman had disappeared. She really was up to something. Just as Viserys was scanning the surroundings, he suddenly felt a gust of wind. His body instinctively dodged, and a sharp dagger slashed past him, leaving a bright afterimage. It was the old woman from before. Now, she stood tall and straight, her disguise shed like a snake's skin. Who are you? Why are you following me? Viserys demanded, his voice steady, though he was on high alert. The assassin's features were obscured by shadows, and she spoke in a deliberately altered, hoarse voice. What makes you think I'm following you? Did Robert send you? Viserys asked, his eyes narrowing. It must have been hard to be at sea for so many days, right? The old woman's eyes widened in shock. How did he know about the storm? And the Zalane house ship? How did he track me here? This sudden insight into her recent struggles unnerved her, making her feel exposed and vulnerable. The assassin, sensing the danger of the situation, turned and fled with the agility of a black cat. Viserys, remaining calm, drew his crossbow and fired in the direction she fled. Whoosh! Thud! A sound confirmed his hit. He approached cautiously and found the assassin lying motionless on the ground, as if paralyzed. The poison from the sea fish couldn't have worked this quickly. Viserys thought, flipping the assassin over just as she gulped something down. Realizing it was a poison pill, he swiftly punched her in the stomach, causing her to convulse and spit out a black, foul-smelling liquid. Seeing her suicide attempt thwarted, she tried to bite her tongue off, but the poison had already taken effect, weakening her jaw. Once assured she was no longer a threat, Viserys began to search her, his eyes widening in surprise. A female assassin! He exclaimed. Chapter 31, Helbo, he's sick. Master, we bought 1,250 gold dragons worth of whale oil. After distributing the amounts for the other brothers, we have a surplus of 842 gold dragons, the young accountant reported, diligently calculating the profits for Helbo. A small mountain of gold dragons shimmered in the light of the whale oil candles. Helbo, feeling particularly generous, grabbed a handful of gold dragons from the pile and slapped it in front of the young accountant. It's yours. Thank you, Master Helbo. Thank you for your generosity. The young accountant was overwhelmed, his mind racing for words to further ingratiate himself with Helbo. He couldn't help but think proudly that if Viserys had listened to him, they would have made even more profit. More importantly, he himself would have earned more. Because of Viserys' sudden defection, Helbo had only managed to take 200 pounds of whale oil instead of the 350 pounds he had originally planned. However, another candle workshop had offered an excellent price, even higher than his ideal. Helbo was in a very good mood, feeling like singing. He took a sip of wine, his eyes narrowing in pleasure. He had already decided to cut ties with Viserys. It was said that Dany's birthday was coming up soon. He planned to send a gift but not go himself. Viserys should understand what he meant. Just as Helbo was lost in his thoughts, a black object was thrown into his room through the window. When he looked closely, he realized it was a person. Helbo remained calm, but the young accountant turned pale. Is someone after me? How dare they, with Viserys still on my side? Helbo looked toward the window, his brain spinning with possibilities. But the next moment, a familiar figure jumped through the window. With silver hair, the identity of the person was unmistakable. Lord Viserys, this. An assassin, sent by the King of Whores, Viserys said calmly. The King of Whores referred, of course, to Robert, a VVIP of the King's Landing brothel. Thanks to his recent improvement in constitution, Viserys had been able to carry an 80 to 90 pounds man on his back and sneak into Helbo's home without making a sound. This guy had even set up 2 sentries near his own home. There's a lot of space there, and there's Dany. It's not safe to take her back, so I'll let you keep her for now. No, are you sick? You and your sister think it's unsafe, but I'm supposed to be fine. Helbo thought to himself, but dared not show it. He quickly put down his wine cup, grabbed the female assassin's ankles, and, together with Viserys, carried her out. Go find some milk and bring it over, Viserys instructed the young accountant. Milk and other things could be used to dilute the toxins. He didn't want the assassin to die just yet. It would be best if he could make her vomit and contact Robert. This would buy him some time, at least until the end of the 10-day celebration. As long as Robert did not involve the faceless men, Viserys would be fine. However, with so many people attending the celebration, and if he participated in the sword competition, he might not be able to keep an eye on Dany. There is no cow milk left. Will goat's milk do? Yes. Meanwhile, Viserys and Helbo carried the assassin to a dark room. It seemed that Helbo really yearned for the life of a noble, as it was said that nobles like to have underground dungeons and the like. This underground room was quite authentic. Inside, there was a wooden bed with mechanisms to restrict a person's movement, and some torture devices. However, upon closer inspection, these torture devices seemed to be more for fun. Threaded, convex, mace, what the hell are these? Viserys gave Helbo a meaningful look, causing him to blush. The two of them tied the female assassin to the bed in a big shape and then let out a sigh of relief. In the dim light, Viserys realized that the female assassin was actually quite good-looking. Her facial features were soft and gentle, not at all what one would expect from an assassin. I'll leave first. Give her some more milk later, and then starve her for a few days. Yes, Helbo replied indifferently. After Viserys left, Helbo took another look at the female assassin. He found her quite attractive, but she was still Viserys' prisoner, and he didn't dare to torture her. A few days later, when Viserys saw that his soap was almost dry, he asked Morel to arrange an introduction to Lady Falia of the Moon Shadow. Morel didn't object, as he had already agreed to facilitate the meeting. However, he understood that simply arranging an introduction didn't guarantee a meeting. To ensure things went smoothly, Morel bribed Falia's maid to mention the matter to her mistress. The maid accepted the money but made no promises, her attitude reflecting Morel's. Agreeing to introduce them didn't mean they would actually meet, and taking money didn't mean the matter would be resolved. On this particular day, Falia was hosting a gathering on her private ship. Every notable courtesan in Braavos had her own ship, where they entertained guests and conducted business. The most esteemed courtesans were protective of their reputations and would only offer their bodies in exchange for significant gifts or favors. An unspoken rule among courtesans was that the more a courtesan did for someone, the less likely they were to give themselves fully to them, though they would occasionally offer personal tokens to keep their admirers hopeful and loyal. Falia, as one of the top courtesans, was well aware of these principles. But today, her client seemed particularly persistent. "Lady Moonshadow, please consider my proposal with mercy. I will never brag about it like those vain men," said the man in front of her. He had black hair, brown eyes and a thin face, dressed in a blue shirt and purple bloomers of such fine quality that Falia had to look away to avoid appearing too interested. The man, however, kept his gaze fixed on Falia. Her thin but well-proportioned shoulders, half-exposed breasts smoother than whale blubber, and seductive curves tapering to a slender waist all captivated him. As his eyes travelled further down, they took in the sudden fullness of her hips, which made him feel parched with desire. "Master Daenerys, thank you for your kindness, but I can still maintain the workshop for the time being," Falia replied, her voice steady. Daenerys laughed, a hint of desperation in his eyes. "Don't be ridiculous. Cooper has already cut the price to half of what it was last year. There's no profit to be made. I've heard that the workshop in Greenwater Town has lost many skilled workers. The candles they make are not only of poor quality, but also more expensive. Why bother going on? Please, give me your heart. I would be happy to die for it, let alone that workshop," he said, his words growing more explicit as he leaned forward like a hungry jackal, poised to pounce at any moment. Chapter 32, Entrapment. Calling out loudly for help is behavior deemed inappropriate for such a social interaction. It implies an inability to control the situation, signaling incompetence. As the young man in front of her slowly approached, Falia felt her blood rushing to her ears. Was she going to suffer a loss today? Ahem. Just as the young man was licking his lips and closing in, a light cough interrupted his next move. Falia let out a sigh of relief. "Lady Falia, our meeting time is almost over today," came the voice of Asha, Falia's maid. The young man paused, his heart filled with resentment, but he dared not make any further moves. Causing a scene could bring trouble to his house unless the other party was willing to submit. "Beauty is not a sin. I apologize for my rudeness. I am truly sorry. Please forgive me, Lady Falia." Falia calmed herself and responded softly, "You are too kind. In a certain light, this is also my honor." She breathed heavily after the young man left her cabin. These professional courtesans were just ordinary girls. They might be outstanding in appearance and temperament, but they lacked the means to protect themselves. Asha entered, her dark almond-shaped eyes full of worry. "Lady Falia, are you all right?" "Yes, I'm fine." Asha, with her Dothraki blood, almond-shaped eyes and long braids, looked wilder than the ordinary Braavos girls. Her body had more impressive curves, and if anything serious happened, she would have to stand up for her master. For instance, if the noble young man hadn't relented, Asha might have had to offer herself to appease him. Fortunately, they had escaped unscathed. After the master and servant had calmed down, Asha tentatively said, "Lady, Morel would like to introduce you to someone. His name is Viserys Targaryen." Despite the unsettling encounter, business had to go on. Viserys. Falia couldn't immediately recall Viserys' identity. The Beggar King. As Falia's personal maid, Asha knew a little about the important people in Braavos and even the free cities. Even she knew about someone like the original Viserys. "What does he want with me?" After the maid's reminder, Falia remembered who the Beggar King was. But she couldn't understand why Viserys was seeking her out. She didn't have an army, and although she had a few swordsmen, they were merely her bodyguards. He said he wanted to talk to you about a good business opportunity. I thought he was going to ask for something else, Falia thought to herself. It seemed the Beggar King wasn't aiming to restore his kingdom but to amass a fortune first. She was wary of getting entangled with the descendants of a fallen kingdom. Viserys was constantly under threat of assassination, and any association with him could make her a target, especially if Robert suspected she and Viserys shared some untold secret. Falia preferred to avoid the so-called good business. Just as she was about to refuse outright, she reconsidered. Such a direct refusal might not be appropriate, especially since Viserys had met the Sea Lord. No matter her status, it couldn't surpass that of the Sea Lord. Falia thought for a moment and said, "Just say that I'm not feeling well and it's inconvenient. If there's anything important, Ranch can handle it." Ranch was Falia's housekeeper and manager. "Understood," Asha replied and left the cabin, leaving Falia alone. Reflecting on her situation, Falia realized she might have fallen into a conspiracy. The winner of the 10-day celebration beauty pageant would not only gain a title and a reward but also have the chance to elevate their status. They would get the opportunity to enter the high walls of Bravus's 3 great houses, potentially merging their lives and bloodlines with them. Even if they failed to achieve this ultimate goal, as winners of the triennial beauty pageant, they would become a symbol of Bravus, the bastard daughter of Valyria. They might even enter diplomatic circles, gaining influence far beyond their current reach. This was the dream of every socialite. But to become the champion, or even to participate in the beauty pageant, there was a stringent prerequisite: virginity. Bravus might be Valyria's bastard daughter, but it wasn't Valyria's little whore. The requirements for participation were exceedingly strict. But now Falia faced another pressing problem. If she couldn't keep Morel's workshop running, she might fall behind in promotion by the time the 10-day festival arrived. If her workshop turned into a theatre, it would be a serious blow to her reputation as Moon Shadow. She was in a dilemma. If she committed to the young man, she might lose her chance to participate in the beauty contest. On the other hand, her life would be in his hands. Even if she managed to enter the competition by other means, she would be vulnerable to his future demands, which she might be reluctant to accept. On the other hand, if she chose to remain chaste, she would be at a great disadvantage and likely to lose. According to an unwritten rule, once a courtesan wins a competition, she tends to ruthlessly suppress her former rivals. The best Falia could hope for in such a scenario would be to escape Bravus. However, for a maiden of 16 or 17, leaving Bravus meant becoming vulnerable and losing all her influence and security. She suddenly empathized with the situation of Viserys and his sister. She now had 2 formidable opponents, the Poetess and the Nightingale. The Nightingale had already announced plans to build a new theatre in Greenwater Town, making it clear who was behind her predicament. "We must save the workshop," Falia resolved. She decided to instruct Ranch to contact Morel again to assess the workshop's situation. If it was truly dire, she would have to intervene to save it. Despite the seemingly luxurious lifestyle of a courtesan, maintaining such a life required considerable expenses. Maids, servants, and numerous relatives depended on her for their livelihood. Falia might even have to consider selling some of her property or jewelry to keep the workshop running. However, she had no idea how badly Morel's workshop was losing money. Chapter 33, Damn, it's a scam. Brother Viserys was in a good mood today and personally cooked a dish of shredded chicken for Dany. Since moving, Dany had rarely tasted Viserys' cooking. The reason was that Morel had told him that Falia had agreed to meet with him at the Moon Pool Theatre near Purple Harbor. The siblings ate heartily, their fingers gleaming with oil, which made the maid on the side jealous. At the same time, she felt a bit ashamed that her cooking wasn't as good as her employer's. After they had finished eating, the maid brought a basin of water for washing their hands. Dany was about to wash her hands when Viserys stopped her. "Wait a minute." Dany watched as Viserys mysteriously took out a round object. It was oval-shaped and more like a goose egg, with a light purple color. When she took it from Viserys' hands, she found it to be delicate and smooth, with a faint scent of gardenia. "Wet it and rub it like this." Following Viserys' demonstration, Dany became the first person in the world to wash her hands with modern soap. How was it? Was it clean enough? Dany looked at her hands in a daze and found that there was indeed no oil residue. In the past, even if she washed her hands with water for a long time, they would still be sticky after a while. But after washing them with this thing, not only did her hands not stick, but they also had a faint fragrance. The maid next to her also stared at the bubbles in the water with curiosity. "This thing is called..." "Damn, there's no word I know for soap in Valyrian. Viserys paused for a moment, then told her that it was soap. Dany remembered that day when Viserys excitedly told her, "We're going to have dragon eggs." But what did this have to do with dragon eggs? "Brother, are you going to sell this?" "Yes, and no." Dany's face showed confusion. "Ha, you don't need to worry about it. Just wait for my good news." After dinner, Viserys took a carriage directly to the nearby port and then boarded a boat to Purple Harbor. As he approached Purple Harbor, he could see the distant purple beach, resembling fields of lavender growing by the sea. In reality, it wasn't lavender but crushed snail shells drying in the sun. When the first refugees discovered Bravus, they quickly took advantage of its specialty, a purple snail. Bravus was developed by the pigment trade, and Viserys' soap was made with this pigment. Soon, he arrived at the Moon Pool Theatre. As he disembarked, he noticed the distant Sea Lord's palace. When Viserys first arrived in Bravus, he was received by the Sea Lord, who even became his witness not long after. However, now he no longer had the qualifications to meet with the Sea Lord. He thought, as long as this soap business succeeds, I can start acquiring dragon eggs. In the original story, Dany hatched 3 eggs, obtaining 3 dragons. It was these 3 dragons that earned her the title Mother of Dragons. Now there are more than 4 years until the so-called Bleeding Star. If I can collect 8 or 10 eggs, Dany can hatch them and raise them. Then, in a few years, when the dragons are grown, I will return to Westeros and get revenge on those rebels. Viserys thought excitedly, already envisioning himself riding a dragon through the sky. I haven't ridden a dragon before. If I haven't ridden a dragon even after I transmigrated, then I would have wasted my time, he mused. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the Moon Pool Theatre. As the saying goes, the Purple Harbor area is full of powerful people, and many wore black or white clothing. Not long after Viserys got off the carriage, a servant in reddish-brown shorts and a yellow vest ran up to him. "Is it Lord Viserys? Lady Falaya is waiting for you. Please follow me." They walked on a smooth stone slab road and stepped onto a soft carpet. The servant led Viserys to the door of a box. "Lady Falaya is waiting for you inside," said the servant, opening the purple lacquered door for him. Viserys felt a mix of excitement and curiosity, eager to see what the famous moon shadow Falaya looked like. In his opinion, these courtesans were somewhat like the courtesans of ancient times in his world. Many protagonists in novels had collections of courtesans, and he wondered if he might have the opportunity as well. Calming his emotions, Viserys entered the room. However, what he saw was a young man in his late 20s with jet black, slightly curly hair, meticulously combed. His azure velvet shirt was perfectly ironed. The man exuded a smart and capable aura, with his entire body appearing almost mannequin-like in its definition. "Hey! I thought I was meeting Lady Falaya." Viserys thought he had gone the wrong way and looked at the waiter with a questioning glance, silently asking how he could have led him so astray. Before the waiter could respond, the man with black hair spoke up, "Lord Viserys." Viserys hesitated but then understood. He softened his expression, walked back into the room, and sat down in front of the young man. "I am here to meet you in place of Lady Falaya." "You can say what you want to say now," the young man said calmly. Viserys glanced out the window. He knew when to lose his temper and when to hold it in. He needed Falaya's name to enter the competition at the 10-day celebration and win the dragon egg. He also needed her help to sell the soap. Since he was asking for something, he would hold back for a while and wait until the other party realized the value of what he had before he put on airs. However, he couldn't be too low-key. Viserys took out 3 egg-shaped soaps from his bag, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 purple. The young man looked at the objects with wide eyes, clearly intrigued. "First of all, I want to say that I don't need money, and secondly, I'm the only one who can make these things. The raw materials for these come from whale oil and Kinsave Morel's workshop," Viserys explained. He then picked up a pastry from the table that was covered in grease and squeezed it, getting his hands covered in oil. Although the young man didn't know what he was going to do, he maintained a calm demeanor. Viserys picked up one of the soaps and wet his hands with the teapot next to him. As he rubbed his hands together, a lot of white foam appeared. After rinsing his hands, Viserys got up and showed his clean hands to the young man. "I hope the price of this soap is 20 silver moons. You can take it back to show it to Lady Moonshadow," Viserys said. He then walked to the door of the room. "If Lady Moonshadow doesn't mind, I'd like to see Lady Nightingale and Lady Poetess as well, so I hope you can give me an answer soon." With that, he closed the door and left. He still had to see how the female assassin was doing today. The woman held the secret of the skin changers. Chapter 34, Bet. Damn it! It was a fraud. Viserys muttered angrily as he left the theatre, but he quickly regained his composure. He believed that Falia knew what she was doing. Once she used the soap, it would become a necessity in her life. Viserys felt a tinge of pride, convinced that she would fall in love with the soap after trying it. Currently, the cost of producing a piece of soap was only 1 or 2 bravus iron coins. If he sold it for 20 silver moons, his profit margin would be an astonishing 7,000%. Suddenly, a chill ran down Viserys' neck as he thought of something. Initially, the soap would be marketed to the upper class, the nobles. These wealthy individuals consumed rich foods daily, which would lead to oily skin. However, his soap was strong enough to dry out their faces after just one use. The more they used it, the oilier their faces would become, prompting them to buy more. It would create a virtuous cycle. Viserys didn't plan to exploit the poor. When the soap became more popular, it would eventually benefit the lower class as well. His mood lifted at the thought. It had been 5 or 6 days since Viserys had subdued the female assassin. Feeling that the time was right, he decided to check on her. By this time, Helbo had heard about Viserys' meeting with Falia. Initially surprised, he was also somewhat relieved. It seemed that the Morel and Falia were close allies. Fortunately, he had not pushed his plan too far. When Helbo learned that Viserys had gone to the Moonpool Theatre, he chuckled to himself. After all his years in Bravus, he knew the rules for courtesans meeting in private. They never left their ships, only coming ashore for public events. In his opinion, Falia would likely not appreciate Viserys' good intentions. That was fine by Helbo. Once the reckless young man had calmed down, he would be easier to manipulate. Imagine that, controlling a prince, a nobleman. Helbo couldn't help but fantasize. Just then, a servant announced that Viserys was visiting. Helbo hurried over to greet him, partly out of curiosity and partly hoping that Viserys would be taken away by Falia. Living under the same roof as an assassin every day was unnerving. The assassin, who had not eaten for 5 or 6 days, had visibly sunken cheeks. To make it easier to feed her, Helbo had put a small device in her mouth. Viserys immediately recognized the device, and after a moment he realized what it was. "Where did you get the gag?" he asked. "Gag? What a great name!" Helbo looked at Viserys, somewhat surprised, as if he had met a kindred spirit. The female assassin had no idea what they were talking about, she just hoped to be released as soon as possible. She saw her target take the candle from the slightly overweight man and hold it up to her face. Confirming the look, it was indeed the person she was supposed to kill. But now she couldn't even kill herself, let alone someone else. Over the past few days, she had seen the torture instruments around her and realized they would be used on her sooner or later. However, to her surprise, the young man did not act as she expected. Instead, he fed her some sweet soup. "Ah! It's so sweet," the assassin sighed in her heart. At the same time, she discovered that her body seemed to be regaining some feeling. For a moment, it felt as if her brain, covered with rusty gears, had been lubricated and her thoughts began to turn again. What does he want? She wondered. The young man in front of her slowly said, "We are all pitiful people." The female assassin didn't expect him to say that. Although she couldn't speak, she thought to herself, pitiful. You were born a prince, and even in a foreign land, you would still be taken care of. You are pitiful? Then everyone is pitiful. Viserys continued, "Do you think I'm talking nonsense? In fact, I've seen everything about you." He began to recount the story he had seen in his dream. The ship you were on encountered a storm in the narrow sea. You were alone at sea for more than 10 days, surviving only on fish and shrimp. Helbo raised his eyebrows, thinking to himself that this assassin was no ordinary person, being able to survive at sea for more than 10 days. But he wondered why Viserys knew so much. "Since I arrived in Bravus at the age of 8, Robert has sent at least 7 or 8 assassins to kill me every year, but I have survived them all. Do you know why? Or don't you think it's amazing that I was only 8 years old at the time, with a baby sister in my arms, and yet I was able to survive Robert's assassins time and time again?" Neither the female assassin nor Helbo believed Viserys' story. However, Helbo knew that the Viserys siblings had indeed wandered alone for several years, and it was not easy to survive so many assassination attempts. The female assassin thought Viserys was just showing off, but the question still lingered in her mind: how did he know she had been shipwrecked? How did he know so much about her? Viserys then gave a very mystical answer. He leaned his face close to the female assassin, and the two could almost feel each other's breath. "Because the gods are warning me," he said. The female assassin narrowed her eyes, obviously not believing him. "We can make a bet. I'll let you go today, and you can go anywhere you want to start preparing again. But the result will still be failure. For 10 days, if you lose, you'll have to follow me. What do you say? Are you in or out?" Viserys' voice had a certain seductive power, like the whisper of a devil. This offer left Helbo beside him dumbfounded. "No, you're seriously ill. How could you dare to let go of the assassin who tried to kill you? What's the point?" he thought. The female assassin didn't hesitate for a second, staring at Viserys with eyes that seemed to be challenging him. Viserys removed her gag and freed her limbs, smiling as he said, "You're free." When he actually let her go, the female assassin's face showed disbelief. Helbo, who was behind Viserys, leaned against the corner of the wall in case she tried to make a move. She walked slowly towards the door, looking back at Viserys hesitantly. "I let you leave, but on one condition: you tried to kill me. But not only did I not kill you, I also saved you. So you owe me 2 lives, I don't need you to repay them. You just can't hurt Dany." Viserys stared into her eyes and said in a firm voice. This seemed risky, but in fact, the risk was not that high. Since his dragon dreams had advanced to the proficient level, he could predict danger even earlier. He could also use dragon dreams to locate her. "How can I lose you with a mystical map?" he thought. If he could subdue this assassin, not only would he be able to participate in the celebration without any worries 2 months later, but most importantly, he would be able to get the skin changer secrets from her. This may allow him to control multiple dragons at the same time after they hatched, preventing the dragon sons from becoming rebellious. "I swear by the gods that I will not harm your sister before I kill you," the female assassin said in common tongue. This was the first thing she had said since she was captured. As he watched the female assassin leave, Helbo realized that the person standing in front of him was not an ordinary fool. He was a complete lunatic. He suddenly remembered a rumor about the Targaryens. Targaryen, they are either mad or great. Chapter 35, Falaya's Boat. When Viserys finished his meeting with the assassin, it had already grown dark. As he made his way home, the stars had appeared in the sky. Upon arriving, he noticed an unfamiliar carriage parked in front of his house. The carriage was adorned with a faint moon emblem, indicating it was a private and exquisite vehicle. The grand nature of the visit suggested it wasn't malicious. 2 figures stood next to the carriage, one was the maid Viserys had hired, and the other seemed familiar. Before he could take 2 steps, the familiar figure approached him. It was Ranch, the young man he had met at the Moon Pool Theatre. This time, Ranch's expression was noticeably friendlier and warmer, likely due to Viserys' meeting with Falaya, the Moon Shadow. Ranch walked forward, bowed slightly to Viserys, and said, "Prince Viserys, Lady Moon Shadow has asked to meet you and hopes to speak with you." This time, Ranch was exceedingly courteous, trying to satisfy Viserys. The reason was that Falaya already knew about the dire situation at the Morel workshop. It was beyond saving, even with an infusion of 10,000 gold dragons. She had placed all her hopes on Viserys, having recognized the value of his soap immediately. Viserys was her last straw. Viserys sensed the change in attitude and understood the urgency. Lady Moon Shadow's immediate request for a meeting indicated the importance of the soap to her. He wanted to leverage this to gain more influence in their dealings. If the soap wasn't crucial, she wouldn't have sought him out so urgently, even at night. "If it's about the soap, please leave. I already have a better partner to work with," Viserys said, trying to test her resolve and willingness to negotiate. Viserys knew that her interest in the soap was a significant opportunity. He wanted to see how desperate she was. He had a backup plan if things didn't work out. He could sell the formula to the Iron Bank and secure some money. However, he hoped it wouldn't come to that. After all, who would kill a hen that lays golden eggs? Fortunately, Viserys' gamble paid off. As soon as he crossed the threshold of his house, he could already sense the urgency in Ranch's demeanor. "Lord Viserys," Ranch hurriedly stood in front of him, "you said you had a new partner, but why don't you come with me to see what Lady Moon Shadow can offer?" Ranch's intuition told him that Viserys was bluffing, but he didn't dare to gamble. The morale workshop was too important to Falia, and he knew what losing it would mean for her. Then let's hurry up, Viserys replied. Okay. Please get in the carriage, Ranch responded. The carriage was filled with a faint aroma, and the seats were adorned with soft velvet pillows, almost like a sofa. As Viserys settled in, he couldn't help but appreciate the comfort, indicating that Falia usually rode in this carriage herself. After about 10 minutes, they arrived at a dock. Viserys thought he would have to disembark and transfer, but to his surprise, Ranch drove the carriage directly onto a boat. Once they arrived at the next port, Ranch simply drove off the boat and continued on their way. So extravagant, Viserys thought, realizing that he didn't even have a personal carriage. He sighed at the opulence. After another half-hour or so, they reached a small lake. Several boats floated on the lake, resembling junk boats but decorated in a style unique to this world. Lanterns hung from the boats, making them easy to spot in the dark. Lord Viserys, we've arrived, Ranch announced. Viserys got off the carriage and took in the serene night. The crescent moon above looked like a small boat hanging in a black velvet sky, dotted with a few stars. Not seeing the familiar Big Dipper, Viserys was reminded that he was no longer in his original world. A moment of sadness washed over him, realizing he might never return. He quickly gathered himself and followed Ranch to the lake, where a small barge awaited. The boatman turned out to be a robust woman. As Viserys and Ranch boarded the boat, ripples spread out from the bottom, distorting the reflection of the crescent moon as they slowly sailed towards one of the boats. Halfway through the journey, a figure emerged from the boat they were approaching. She was less than 1.6 meters tall but had an explosive figure. Even in the dim light, her silhouette was captivating. When they reached the side of the boat, Ranch made a gesture of invitation, indicating he would not be joining them. Viserys then saw the true face of the figure. She had spirited almond-shaped eyes and well-defined features. Her figure was undoubtedly an asset. However, Viserys knew from her attire that she was not Falia. Still, he said, this is Lady Moonshadow. It is an honor to meet you. The maid was momentarily stunned but quickly responded, Lady Moonshadow's maid. She is waiting for you inside. Sorry, my mistake, Viserys replied. At this moment, Asha clearly saw Viserys' appearance under the moonlight and couldn't help but feel a good impression. To Asha, such handsome boys were not common. Coupled with the amusing misunderstanding earlier, her heart softened. However, when she noticed Ranch's gesture on the boat, her expression grew more serious. Viserys, unaware of this, was preoccupied with what to say during the meeting. His earlier behavior was strategic, based on the saying, it's easier to face the known danger than to deal with the unseen threat. If he could get along with Falia's associates, it would make future dealings with her much smoother. Asha lifted the curtain for Viserys, and as soon as he entered, he was greeted by a scent similar to that in the carriage. He passed through a small door and found himself in what looked like a small living room. In front of him was a table with a few exquisite chairs on either side. A woman wearing a moon-white cloak sat behind the table, her veil concealing her face. She looked towards the door as he entered. At that moment, 3 crisp bells rang outside the boat, and Falia's eyes flickered twice, once for the silver bells outside and once for Viserys' appearance. However, Viserys now felt slightly irritated. This woman was blocking his view entirely. Her figure was hidden by the cloak, and her face was covered by a veil. How ridiculous! But he reminded himself that the purpose of today's meeting was to discuss business and cooperation. If she didn't want to show her face, it wasn't necessary. Falia made a gesture of invitation, indicating that he should take a seat. Viserys sat down with ease and said, I don't know what cooperation plan Lady Falia has, so please, tell me directly. Chapter 36, Alas! Falia, behind her veil, gently raised the corner of her mouth and placed the soap that Ranch had brought back on a plate. She said, Ranch told me that Prince Viserys is prepared to sell this for 20 silver moons. I think the prince may not understand the true value of this soap in Bravus. I believe it can be sold for 3 gold dragons, or even 5 gold dragons initially. Falia's offer was far higher than Viserys' expectations. He had thought that selling the soap at 20 silver moons was already a great deal. Before moving into the rich district, the water vendor who lived near him had to work hard for 2 days to earn 1 silver moon. 20 silver moons was almost a month's income for him. 1 gold dragon could be exchanged for about 30 silver moons. Falia's suggestion of 3 to 5 gold dragons raised the price by 4 or 5 times and hinted at a high demand. Viserys, trying not to show his shock, responded calmly, well, the ingredients for making soap are actually not expensive. Most of the materials needed are similar to those for whale oil candles. It's mainly the production process that is complicated and difficult. He subtly emphasized his point, glossing over the issue of underpricing. Falia nodded slightly, understanding that the young man before her was strengthening his bargaining chip. It was her turn to make an offer. If the prince is willing to cooperate, I think I can sell the soap for 5 gold dragons. However, if we want to reach more people, we may have to lower the price eventually. As for the distribution of profits, what are prince's requirements? Viserys thought for a moment and said, let's split it 20/80. Falia was visibly taken aback. You only want 20%? I think. No, I get 80%. The atmosphere became tense. Viserys maintained a smile, feeling like a dragon lord returning in an urban novel, though he was simply raising the stakes in their negotiation. Although he had the formula, he wasn't planning to involve himself in the workshop or the publicity. His aim was to secure around 50%. Falia was indeed a top-notch courtesan. First, she poured a cup of tea for Viserys, and then said, I have some friends among the Moonsingers. They are all capable and wealthy businessmen. To maintain these friendships requires some thought. Falia implied that selling soap would require paying off the right people, and the costs would not just be raw materials and labor. While talking about the Moonsingers, she unobtrusively removed her veil. Holy shit, Angelina or Christina. Viserys was amazed, realizing that she was a combination of 2 actresses from his past life. The former was a Russian model, and the latter was known as the Rose of France. She was a courtesan, and she was very good at it. Falia's realistic questions and her appearance became powerful arguments to convince Viserys. Although Viserys tried his best to restrain himself, he was discovered. There was nothing he could do, she was a professional. Viserys nodded in agreement. Besides, if we want to maximize the profits from the soap, we have to work harder. But don't worry, Prince, I will hold more banquets to let more people see the benefits of the soap as soon as possible. Falia took a sip of tea and frowned slightly. I'm sorry, Prince Viserys, the tea may be a little cold. It's fine, said Viserys. At that moment, a cool breeze blew in, making the warmth in the cabin even less. It's cold. Falia wrapped her cloak around her body, revealing a thrilling curve that made Viserys' heart race. Oh, wow, Viserys let out a soft sigh. Are you not feeling well, Prince? Falia asked. In fact, she did it on purpose. No, I mean the tea tastes good, Viserys covered up awkwardly. Falia smiled lightly and didn't expose it. But this smile seemed as if it had been carved countless times in front of a mirror. Every expression was just right, making people's hearts sway. At this time, Falia said, I heard that Prince Viserys has a younger sister named Dany. Suddenly, Viserys, who had been full of springtime, suddenly became cold. It was as if he had awakened the sleeping dragon in his body. His eyes looked at Falia with murderous intent, making her shiver. Oh! Just a simple change in tone made the air around him chillier. Falia didn't know why the young man in front of her had changed so drastically. She remembered what Ranch had told her about Viserys' notorious reputation, and her heart was in her throat. Forcing herself to remain calm, she took out a box from her side. I heard that Princess Dany was born in a storm, and the season with the most storms in the Narrow Sea seems to be August and September, but I don't know exactly when Princess Dany was born. She swallowed and gently opened the box in front of her, revealing a delicate necklace. I don't know if Dany's birthday has passed, so if it hasn't, I'll give this to her as a birthday gift. The necklace had 7 precious stones inlaid on it, the middle one a deep purple and the 6 surrounding it a vivid green. It was obviously very valuable. Falia looked at Viserys carefully, hardly daring to breathe. Viserys couldn't be blamed for overreacting. The so-called big shot who coveted Dany had not yet shown his face. If he was trying to use Falia to make contact, then she would turn the tables on him. Once he realized Falia's true intentions were innocent, he calmed down. He was impressed that she had deduced Dany's birthday from some rumors. His attitude softened, and he accepted the necklace on behalf of his little sister. Finally, the two sides reached an agreement. For every bar of soap sold, Viserys would take half the profits, but he would give 5% to Falia for her work in marketing the dragon eggs. After all, dragon eggs were a rare commodity. In addition to the money needed to buy them, a lot of money was needed to gather information and make connections. In other words, Viserys would take half the profits, and Morel's workshop and Falia would split the remaining half. Considering that the soap would initially be a high-end product, the first batch would only be 300 to 500 pieces. The second batch would be 1,000 to 1,500 pieces. By the time of the 10-day celebration, 3,000 pieces would be released. They agreed to change the name of the soap to Shadow of the Moon. The soap is the moon, and the foam is its shadow. After returning, Viserys sent all of his first batch of experimental products to Falia for her to handle. The two also agreed that Viserys would participate in the festival as her poet 2 months later. In this way, the dragon egg would be taken care of. Meanwhile, when Helbo found out that Viserys had really met Falia and reached a cooperation agreement, he was so regretful that he almost turned blue. "Oh, yes, Lady Dany, it seems that her birthday is coming up soon. I have to prepare something nice." He opened the secret compartment in his home and took out a handful of gold coins. He thought it wasn't enough and grabbed a few more handfuls. Ignoring the now noticeable dent in his pile, he immediately went outside to look for a gift. Chapter 37, Iron Bank. Just as Helbo was hurrying to meet Viserys, he found that Viserys was not at home. What made him even more upset was that none of the maids hired by Viserys would let him in the door. From afar, he could only see Dany practicing swordsmanship on the grass. He wanted to ask Dany where Viserys had gone, but she only waved at him from a distance. "I'm such a fool." Helbo cursed himself, realizing that Viserys seemed to be deliberately distancing himself. For more than 10 years, Helbo had not achieved his goal of owning a proper business, and he subconsciously thought that Viserys, the Beggar King, would not be able to achieve this goal so easily. In his opinion, Viserys was only good at fighting and not necessarily talented in business. But now, it seemed he had completely misjudged. Meeting Moon Shadow meant that Viserys' attempt had won recognition. With Falia's guarantee, Viserys was able to do in a few months what Helbo had been unable to do in a decade. If Viserys had his own business, he would no longer be in the same class as Helbo. Realizing that Viserys might be an opportunity for him to move up in the world, Helbo went straight to the workshop. After all, Viserys' laboratory was there. What Helbo didn't know was that the reason he couldn't get in was because Viserys had seen his torture device. After Helbo left that day, Viserys instructed his maids not to let Helbo in if he wasn't home and not to let him near Dany. He also told Dany to greet Helbo from afar and not to talk to him. Meanwhile, Viserys, accompanied by Morel, was about to arrive at the famous Iron Bank. As anyone who has watched Game of Thrones knows, the Iron Bank is famous. Littlefinger became master of coin because he borrowed money from the Iron Bank, making it seem as if he could conjure up money with his 2 fingers. In reality, the interest on these loans was passed on to the common people of Westeros. Later, Westeros was in chaos, and Stannis Baratheon borrowed money from the Iron Bank, as did Jon Snow. Even further back in time, during the Targaryen era, there were kings who wanted to deposit money in the Iron Bank to earn interest. This shows how powerful it is. Of course, the Iron Bank can't just only have money bags, otherwise, it would just become a target for others. It also has weapons, and if anyone dares to default, it will support their opponent with money or support the rebels. When the rebels or the defaulting opponent come to power, they have to take over the mess left behind by their predecessors. The Iron Bank got its name because its founder initially stored his money in an abandoned iron mine. But the Iron Bank, which has long since become big and strong, has moved its headquarters away from the mine. The current headquarters of the Iron Bank is more like a heavily fortified fortress. "Prince, the Iron Bank is just ahead," Morel said with a newfound respect in his voice. Ever since Viserys had met with Falia and struck a deal, Morel's admiration for him had grown. He had witnessed the magic of soap firsthand and knew his workshop was saved because of it. At Morel's prompting, Viserys stuck his head out of the carriage. In the distance, he saw the tall, heavy walls of the Iron Bank, with guards patrolling back and forth. The guards were well armed and well built, clearly well trained and well fed. The road was lined with barricades. An Iron Bank guard stopped their carriage for inspection. The guard wore a black cloak adorned with white dots, the symbol for money. After checking their identities, their carriage passed through 3 more gates. Beyond these gates, the 2 men were asked to disembark and continue on foot. "Prince, this is where the Iron Bank conducts its business," Morel said, gesturing toward the building. Viserys nodded. In front of him stood a tall, imposing structure that looked like a combination of a temple and a courthouse. Above the entrance was a statue of a woman with arms that transformed into wings. As they walked a few steps further, Viserys noticed something underfoot. He looked down and saw a line of relief text written in the common tongue, Dothraki and Valyrian, the Iron Bank will have its due. Suddenly, Viserys felt the gravity of the Game of Thrones scratch up. Every faction with a name has a slogan that belongs to them. Fire and blood. A. Lannister always pays his debts. Family, duty, honor. Growing. Strong. And House Stark's winter is coming. The two continued walking and entered the hall of the building. As soon as they stepped inside, Viserys felt at least 3 pairs of eyes on him. They weren't malicious, just observing. The hall was quiet, with only the sound of shuffling feet and the rustling of pens on paper. At that moment, an Iron Bank employee with a long beard and wearing a brown uniform approached the two men. "Lord, do you need to borrow, deposit, or withdraw money? Get a card." "Hey." The soul of the transmigrator couldn't resist a little joke before answering seriously, "Withdraw money. Okay, please follow me." The employee took out a key from his breast pocket and led Viserys into a small room, leaving Morel waiting outside. The employee asked Viserys to take a seat and then sat across from him. "What is your name?" "Viserys Targaryen." The employee bowed his head and wrote something down, then asked a few more questions, appearing extremely serious. Viserys suddenly remembered that the original Viserys had also come to the Iron Bank to borrow money, but was rejected. The reason, of course, was that they did not believe Viserys could restore the realm. Although they did not have the technology to collect big data and check the flow of money like modern banks, they also had their own set of audit plans. "To confirm, you want to withdraw money?" "That's right." "What is your account number?" Viserys told him the account number left by Illyrio. "The account password, please." "Fire and blood." When Viserys said the correct password, the employee's serious expression melted away and immediately became friendly. "You have 7,000 gold dragons in your account. How much would you like to withdraw?" 5,000. "Do you need an escort?" "No. How much does an escort cost?" The employee smiled and said, "We have 5 levels of escort service." "Okay, which one do you recommend?" After learning about some of the Iron Bank's services, Viserys paid 100 gold dragons and chose a covered protection package. With the money, they left the Iron Bank. They had not gone far when the service proved its worth. The person being restrained by the Iron Bank guards looked familiar. It was Helbo. Chapter 38, Dany's birthday. During this time, Viserys could sense Helbo's gradually cold attitude. However, he didn't care. Viserys believed that he could offer something so enticing that Helbo would be compelled to show his loyalty. "This is an acquaintance. Let him come up," Viserys said, and the plainclothes guards of the Iron Bank released Helbo. Helbo stretched his joints a bit and got into the carriage with a smirk. "Godman Helbo, what a surprise to meet you here," Viserys teased. "I heard that Lady Dany's birthday is coming up soon, so I wanted to ask where it will be held," Helbo replied. His excuse was pretty lame, but Viserys didn't call him out on it. In his previous life, he had heard a saying that some people have birthdays because they want to have them, and some people have birthdays because others need them to have them. Curious, Viserys asked, "Where did you hear about Dany's birthday?" Helbo's answer impressed Viserys. Sir Darry, who had fled with the siblings, had lived with them in the house with the red door. After Sir Darry's death, the servants in the house began to divide up his possessions. When Helbo and Viserys were still working together, Helbo had secretly found those people. Although he did not recover any goods, he was able to ask about the siblings' birthdays. He had originally planned to part ways with Viserys, but now he realized that he could use this information. "Dany has suffered with me for many years, but there's no need to make a big deal of it. Let's just celebrate at my place," Viserys said. Hearing this, Helbo's heart finally settled. "Us. Listen to that, it's a comforting word." At this point, Helbo didn't have any more extravagant wishes. He thought Viserys had fallen into Phalia's clutches and was just one step away from being completely influenced by her. To his surprise, Viserys handed him a white, shelled egg. "What is this?" Helbo asked. "Moonshadow. This is the product of my collaboration with Lady Moonshadow. How much do you think this will sell for?" Viserys replied. Helbo held the soap in his hand and felt it. It was smooth and slippery. But after touching it, there was no residue on his hands, and it felt fresh and clean. He sniffed it under his nose and noticed a faint aroma. This thing must be made from whale oil, right? It shouldn't be too expensive, Helbo thought to himself. He quoted a price he thought was relatively high. 5 or 6 silver moons. Viserys smiled and said, higher. A dozen. Higher. 20 or so. Gods. Morel, who had been watching Helbo's face, saw his expression gradually change to one of disbelief. Helbo, 1 moon shadow sells for 5 gold dragons. This is the lowest price. Hearing that it was 5 gold dragons, Helbo nearly dropped the soap. 5 gold dragons. Helbo was already regretting his earlier decision. If he could confront his past self who sold the whale oil, he would have beaten him black and blue. Seeing Helbo's reaction, Viserys decided it was time to make his offer. I have decided to give you 2% of the share as a reward for taking charge of the workshop's safety. What do you think? 2%? Yes, Master Morel will guarantee our transaction. Helbo was stunned. I've suddenly become a member of the bourgeoisie. I've done what even Bannergar couldn't do. Helbo felt dizzy. Looking at the rapidly receding scenery outside the carriage, everything felt surreal. The main reason Viserys was willing to let Helbo participate was to avoid wasting too much energy on managing the business. Strengthening his power, finding a way to obtain the skin changer technique, practicing the skin changer technique, and collecting dragon eggs were all very energy-intensive tasks. Spending some money to keep the soap business running smoothly was more important than anything else. His own energy and time were his most precious resources. Soon, the first batch of soap flowed into the market. Falia truly had a head for business. After receiving the first batch of soap from Viserys, she immediately offered 50 pieces to the Temple of the Moonsingers. Given that Falia was called Moonshadow and the soap was named Moonshadow, it struck a chord with the temple leader. Falia was promptly given the title of Pure, becoming known as Pure Falia. This newfound title immediately boosted her reputation, attracting more guests to her establishment. Consequently, the price of a bar of soap skyrocketed to more than 10, sometimes even 20, gold dragons. Naturally, this kind of success attracted envy. However, the current profits from the limited display of soaps were not enough to tempt the major players. This was a result of Viserys' deliberate control of production, ensuring that soap remained a luxury item. Viserys knew that if he flooded the market with soap, selling each bar for 10 or even dozens of silver moons across the free cities, the powerful factions lurking in the shadows would pounce, tearing his business apart like sharks smelling blood. In the end, he was still too weak. Constantly on edge, it felt as if he was walking on thin ice, never knowing if he would make it to the other side. In the theater, a young man held a bar of soap and asked, "Which workshop made this?" "We're still investigating, Lord Anderson," the clerk replied. "Still investigating? No need to investigate anymore." Anderson casually placed the soap on the table. Recently, Morel had become unusually stubborn, refusing to sell the workshop. Not only that, but they had the funds to buy new raw materials. Anderson guessed that the Morel Candle Workshop was the source of the soap. Additionally, with the workshop being associated with Falia, and the soap named Moonshadow while she was called Moonshadow, the connection was clear as day. "Find out who made this. I'll offer him a satisfactory price," Anderson commanded. Anderson hailed from House Frigger, one of the 3 great families of Bravus. To him, money was just a number. As long as he could topple Falia and ensure that the courtesan on his side won the beauty pageant, it would be worth it. Meanwhile, Viserys was unaware of these developments. The deadline he had set with the female assassin was approaching. If he could subdue her, he would gain the art of the skin changers. If he could control birds of prey like falcons, it would greatly benefit his future career as a sellsword. With no battlefield fog and one-sided transparent information, any well-educated general could dominate. "It's almost time," he thought. After using dragon dreams to scout, Viserys decided that tonight, he would definitely convince the assassin. Chapter 39, Half Skin Changer. As night falls, the idle nobles who have spent the day eating and drinking begin to stir. Their evening diversions, including beautiful women and fragrant carriages, are ready for them. Meanwhile, workers and vendors, exhausted from a day of hard labor, continue to endure the harsh realities of life. They are scattered everywhere at the docks, on the hills, in the marketplaces, and in the workshops. In a small, somewhat dark and damp inn, a female assassin meticulously counts her equipment. She has spent her time observing Viserys' movements and found them quite predictable. He travels back and forth between the workshop and home, avoiding banquets entirely. His daily routine consists mainly of practicing swordsmanship or teaching Dany to do the same. This assassin admires his skill. Despite being under 16, Viserys' talent in swordsmanship surpasses that of many who have trained for 10 or 15 years. She acknowledges his potential to become a legendary figure like the Sword of the Morning if given time. So she decides to assassinate him at night, when he is unarmed and vulnerable in close combat, an area in which she excels. Yet, one thing makes her uneasy: the crossbow Viserys had given her, the same weapon that had once incapacitated her. It was small, exquisite, and lethal from 20 paces, a perfect weapon for an assassin. She couldn't fathom why Viserys would arm her with such a weapon. Did he truly have that much confidence in himself? Her unease grows when she recalls Viserys' precise recounting of her encounter at sea. He must not know my true abilities, she reassures herself. The assassin takes out a small cage containing several crickets. It was through these crickets that she had gained such detailed insights into Viserys' movements. By entering their consciousness, she had essentially planted a listening device in his home. Although crickets have poor eyesight and rely mainly on hearing, it was enough for her to track his movements. 1 cricket, 2 crossbows, 3 daggers, and 6 arrows — this was her entire arsenal for the assassination. She leans the 7-god wreath she had woven against the wall of the table, preparing to pray before the mission. But somehow, the wreath keeps slipping off the wall. In the end, she used the small stone from the table leg to hold the wreath in place. This small frustration further unsettled her. Could it be that the prince of the fallen kingdom is truly protected by the gods? Father, mother, smith, warrior, she prayed softly, finishing her invocation within seconds. After one final equipment check, she disguised herself as an old woman and left the inn through the window. As she climbed out, the garland slipped again. She left the hostel like a fish diving into the sea of darkness. To avoid detection, she had chosen a remote place to stay. Her first stop was the nearby pier. Boat? To Drowned Town, to Greenwater Town, to Silta Town. Is there a boat? One more person needed. To Greenwater Town. Only 10 iron coins. Chartered boat. 20 iron coins. The boatmen at the pier were shouting like taxi drivers at a train station. The female assassin noticed a skinny old boatman with white hair. His boat was small and seemed barely able to carry many people. It was also unstable, which suited her needs perfectly. She wanted to travel alone to minimize the risk of exposure. After agreeing on the price, they set off. When they reached a quiet stretch of water, the old boatman suddenly spoke. "Hey, where are you going?" His voice was hoarse and unnatural. "To Bitterwell Town." "What town?" "Bitterwell Town." "Bitter what?" "Bitterwell Town." "What town?" Bitter. The female assassin's eyes grew cautious as she realized something was wrong. The old boatman was looking at her with a mocking expression. For a moment, she felt as if she were ensnared by a large net, her skin tingling with alarm. "Where are you going, little sister?" "I, Viserys, will definitely send you there." She was suddenly startled. It was Viserys. Who else could it be? She immediately reached for her waist, activating her 2 crossbows simultaneously, but Viserys blocked them with his bare hands. No, not bare hands, a black weapon. His reaction speed was terrifying. The female assassin's pupils contracted in shock. This young man's reaction speed and close combat skills were formidable. She had thought she could defeat him in close combat. For a moment, she wanted to dive and escape. As if reading her thoughts, Viserys shouted, "Wait, we agreed that if you fail, you will work for me. Are you going to break your promise?" She glanced at Viserys and hesitated. Under her brutal training, her body instinctively urged her to flee, but her brain made a different judgment. Viserys had indeed spared her twice before, as he had said. They had an agreement. Additionally, her intuition told her she might not be able to escape at all. Seeing her hesitation, Viserys said, "Before you tried to assassinate me, the 7 gods already gave you a revelation. Are you still going to be so stubborn?" His voice echoed over the water, scattering fish and shrimp in fright. The female assassin's face twitched in disbelief, her mental defenses on the verge of collapse. Viserys threw the dragon bone dagger at her feet, where it quivered in the deck. She shuddered like a frightened rabbit. Accept the will of the gods and follow me, or disobey the will of the gods and kill yourself. For a moment, she felt as if her body was being pulled in a strange way, like branches swaying in the cold wind. Finally, she made a difficult decision and sat down despondently. My name is Kyla. Viserys rowed the boat to a relatively secluded spot. Kyla? Who sent you? King Robert. Nonsense. I asked who gave you the order to kill me. Kyla seemed a bit dazed. It was Lord Peter. Of course, Viserys thought. Varys wanted the siblings to be targets to attract attention, so it couldn't be him. Robert was a hands-off leader. With Jon Arryn as Hand of the King, Robert wouldn't be directly involved in this. Littlefinger hadn't yet become Master of Coin, so it made sense for him to engage in some small assassination activities as an achievement. Does Peter know that you're a skin changer? Viserys asked. Skin changer? Kyla looked confused. Skin changer, someone who can control animals. You mean a circus performer? No, a skin changer. Someone who can put their consciousness into the minds of animals. What is consciousness? Oh, another illiterate, Viserys thought. I saw how you caught the fish and shrimp when you were drifting at sea. With my hands. Nonsense. I mean, why did they come to you? They didn't come. They swam. Kyla was genuinely confused and thought Viserys was a fool. The gods had chosen such a person. Viserys rubbed his forehead, pondering for a moment before speaking. Can you show me how you catch fish? Kyla looked up at the sky and then back at the water. Viserys widened his eyes, not wanting to miss any detail. After a few minutes, Kyla's brown pupils disappeared, making her resemble a ghost on Viserys' boat. It was eerie, especially at night on a small boat. Moments later, her eyes returned to normal, and she seemed to spring back to life. Her body swayed, and she reached out, grabbing a small fish with her hand. Yes, yes, yes. This is it. How did you do that? Viserys asked excitedly. My mother taught me, Kyla replied. Tell me more. Using some persuasive techniques, Viserys coaxed Kyla into sharing her background. Kyla was from the Riverlands, her father a local man and her mother from beyond the wall. Her mother was a true skin changer, able to control black cats to catch mice. This ability allowed her to guard the Lord's granary and raise Kyla after her father's early death. But during the Usurpers' War, Kyla became an orphan, abducted by human traffickers, and trained to be an assassin. She excelled due to her ability to control insects and fish, though she never matched her mother's skill. My mother told me to keep my abilities a secret. I'm only telling you because I think you are blessed by the 7 gods, Kyla confessed. Thanks, but I have another question. When you control fish at sea, your body shakes. Why is that? Oh? I'm shaking? Actually, I just feel a little dizzy at most. Okay, that matches up, Viserys thought. He didn't ask if she felt her brain was getting dumber, considering she didn't seem very smart to begin with. I hope you can teach me this skill. My mother said that not everyone can learn it. Viserys sighed inwardly but pressed on. But you should be able to teach me, you have the favor of the 7. Kyla pondered for a moment before starting to explain. The key to warging, she said, was imagination. One had to imagine themselves as the animal they wanted to control, observe its behavior, and see the world through its perspective. As Kyla continued, Viserys found her explanations difficult to grasp, like listening to a baby babbling. He understood the words individually, but when she spoke, they seemed jumbled. He had to rearrange and combine them, using various analogies to establish effective communication. The two chatted for a long time until the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn. If you succeeded in your assassination, how will you contact the person who gave you the order? Viserys asked, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. We don't communicate directly. If I succeeded, I would have to leave a mark at a predetermined location, Kyla replied. And if you fail? Will there be a different sign? Yes, there is a sign for failure too, Kyla admitted, feeling a mix of intrigue and wariness. Viserys nodded, recognizing the cleverness of the system. Is there a sign for preparing? There is. I drew such a symbol some time ago. Viserys was pleased to hear this. It meant that no one in Bravos was aware of Kyla's presence or her intentions. As long as he kept sending the preparing sign, he could focus on participating in the tournament at the great celebration without worry. With only a month until the celebration, he felt reassured, knowing that Braavos was far from King's Landing and that his plan had time to unfold. Viserys decided he would release the news of his assassination later, then give Kyla a new identity to keep her close. His Dragon Dreams ability allowed him to target and locate those with active killing intent toward him. This ability only worked for those who were actively planning and moving against him, not for vague threats or passive wishes. For instance, Robert wanted him dead but hadn't made any specific preparations. Similarly, Littlefinger, acting on Robert's orders, wanted to eliminate him but hadn't taken concrete steps. Therefore, Viserys couldn't locate these threats. As he pondered this, Viserys realized that if his Dragon Dreams ability improved, he might be able to sense those with mere ill intentions or even those who mentioned or thought about him. This potential expansion of his abilities excited him, as it could grant him an almost godlike awareness of his surroundings and enemies. A sudden realization hit Viserys, and he froze. He thought about the relationship between gods and their believers. Believers prayed, and gods responded. Could the advanced state of Dragon Dreams function similarly, allowing him to know all intentions directed toward him? The thought made him swallow hard, a mix of excitement and fear surging through him. A crazy idea formed in his mind. A long staircase appeared before him in his imagination, leading to a solemn altar at the top. Chapter 40, Dany's Birthday 2. The profits from working with Viserys during this period far exceeded Phalia's expectations. She gifted one of her ships to Dany on her birthday, naming it the Silver Girl. Although Dany couldn't handle the cargo ship and Viserys lacked the time to manage it, Phalia continued to run the ship, while the profits belonged to Dany. On this day, Viserys held a birthday party for Dany. The number of guests far surpassed his expectations. The spacious yard was nearly packed. Guests, aware of Viserys and Phalia's close business partnership, attended hoping to capitalize on it, not yet understanding the true value of the event. Carriages blocked the road, and the room overflowed with gifts. Dany was dazzled by the colorful boxes of all sizes, stacked like a small mountain. Phalia sent Ranch, and naturally, Morel and his son were present. Helbo, who had planned to bring many items, found it difficult to squeeze in. With a bright idea, he called in a dozen of his men to maintain order and his maid to assist. He also invited a singer to praise Dany's beauty, and guests danced to the music. Only then did Viserys and Dany finally appear. Seeing that it was almost time, Viserys asked his maid to call Dany down. Dany wore a necklace from Phalia, a silver dress, and a hair accessory that took 4 hours to make. She truly embodied the elegance of a Targaryen princess. However, when Dany saw the large crowd at her birthday party, she felt overwhelmed. The lawn where she usually practiced swordsmanship was packed with people, creating a vibrant tapestry of colors. It was clear the lawn would need renovation after the party. As Dany appeared, the guests turned to look at her, unable to take their eyes off her. They had never seen such a beautiful young girl, and their gazes made Dany even more nervous. She felt a tinge of post-traumatic stress disorder, remembering the infamous crown party her brother Viserys had thrown, which became the laughingstock of the city and tormented her for an entire year. "Don't be afraid. Just say hello to the guests," Viserys whispered. He wanted to pat Dany's head, but the elaborate hair ornaments made him hesitate. Glancing back, he saw a woman in a black mask nodding at him. It was Kyla. Since being captured by Viserys, she had become Dany's personal bodyguard, sleeping in the room next to Dany's and never leaving her side during the day. She had already informed her superiors by special means that she was looking for an opportunity to make her move during the 10-day festival. Viserys raised his wine glass and tapped it with a spoon. The guests, who had not yet seen the main character, Dany, looked over. "Thank you all for coming to my sister Daenerys' birthday party. To Dany's health. Cheers." "Cheers!" The guests raised their glasses and drank. Many thought they should be toasting Dany's beauty. Viserys looked around and continued, "In addition, to thank you all for coming, I have prepared some gifts for you, which will be distributed by our Dany." "Wow! A gift? What gift?" the guests whispered, as a bald man carrying a large bamboo basket appeared. It was Regis. Regis's basket contained numerous exquisite boxes. He led the way, followed by Dany and Kyla. Dany handed the boxes to everyone personally, giving some the chance to admire her beauty up close. "Thank you for coming to my birthday party." "No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for coming to my birthday party. It's the gods' favor to me." "Thank you." Even those who hadn't attended the party would think it worthwhile just to see Dany's beauty. Some guests carefully opened their boxes and found the moon shadow inside. Although it was only the size of a quail egg, it was enough to surprise them. What Viserys said next made their trip truly worthwhile. These moon shadows are all the scraps of the moon shadows offered to the gods. If they are used to worship the gods, it is disrespectful, but if they are used by mortals, it is a kind of grace. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone quickly took a look and then carefully tucked the gift into their arms. In this era of poor medical conditions, the moon shadow was more than just a piece of soap. With the blessing of the gods, it might be the elixir that brings the dead back to life in desperate moments. However, not everyone was impressed. Anderson pinched the soap with his fingernail, finding it greasy, and tossed it back into the box. His eyes never left Dany. She was even more beautiful than the first time he saw her, reaffirming his confidence in his own judgment. In fact, he had been the one to set the original trap for Viserys. Anderson's gaze shifted to Viserys, his brown eyes flashing with malice. A stray dog that keeps getting in the way of my plans. Today, you will learn the meaning of the word obey. To him, the siblings were easy prey. After setting his sights on Dany, he hired a trainer from Nugis to prepare her as a bed slave, a plan only thwarted by Viserys' interference. However, this time his goal aligned with his family's interests, allowing him to pressure the Viserys siblings on behalf of House Frigger. He gave his personal servant a discreet nod. The lean servant in his 30s, seemingly telepathic with his master, understood the request without a word. He nodded back and walked towards Viserys and the others. "Who is it?" Regis, serving tea and water to the guests, heard a knock at the door. He approached, a bit impatient. When the person at the door introduced himself, Regis seemed to panic. Yes, yes, yes. Just a moment." Viserys and the others noticed Regis's strange reaction and looked at him with concern. "Someone from House Frigger is here." Frigger. The name rang in Helbo's ears, causing his hand to shake and the meat on his fork to fall. He glanced at Viserys, thinking the young man was being overly proud. While it was an achievement for Falia to send someone to congratulate his sister, associating with such a powerful family was even more impressive. But remembering Viserys' former identity, it was not surprising. Old Morel and his son were also clearly surprised, but Morel sensed something was amiss when he saw Viserys' expression. Viserys himself was confused. He had no connection with House Frigger, except for a clue he had found earlier indicating that before Dangler left Braavos, he had gone to Moonsingers, where the Friggers had the most concentrated family business. The other party did not seem friendly. Despite his lack of strength to refuse, Viserys agreed to let the visitor in. A moment later, a young man in his late 20s with a strong build entered. He surveyed the room, his manner presumptuous and eyes revealing contempt. When he looked at Viserys, jealousy flashed in his eyes. "Humph, with such a face, it would be better to sell him to Nugis to be trained as a bed slave." "It is a great honor to have you attend my sister's birthday party," Viserys said as the host. But Anderson ignored Viserys' words and sat down uninvited. Morel and Helbo, sensing something was wrong, put down their knives and forks, sitting primly with their hands under the table and wearing flattering smiles. Anderson, however, paid them no mind and looked at Viserys. "How is Prince Viserys doing in Braavos?" Just as Viserys was about to respond, Anderson waved him off. "Hey, a dog that has lost its home, how could it be doing well?" Viserys was now certain that the man before him was the one who had set him up. He remembered that when the current Sea Lord was about to die, he transferred his power to the House Frigger. This meant that in the future, the Frigger family would likely win the battle against House Zalane. Although Viserys had previously discovered that the person who set up the original Viserys might be from House Frigger, he chose to remain silent. But now that Anderson had made a bold appearance, Viserys realized he had little room to back down. Anderson's words caused Helbo and the others to gasp in surprise. His rudeness made them wonder when Viserys had offended him. The group dared not breathe, observing Viserys and Anderson's reactions. Viserys knew this was not the time to turn his back on them, nor did he have the means to do so. The original Viserys had died a violent death for not setting things straight. He told himself to endure for the time being. If he really wanted to vent his anger, he could wait until the dragon hatched. Then, even if he had to level Braavos, he would have a chance. "Your words are indeed sharp," he responded in a neutral tone. Anderson was a little surprised to see that Viserys' expression had not changed. Leaning back, he looked around and said, "Where is Dany?" Why is the main character of this banquet missing? She's upstairs opening her presents, Viserys replied. Oh, I see. Dany is the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, Anderson said as the maid Jill served him with cutlery. Anderson grabbed a fork and rudely poked a large piece of meat off the lamb chop on the plate. When Dany grows up, she will definitely be a beauty. If she becomes the courtesan of Bravos, she will surely win the beauty pageant and become the chief courtesan. Then countless men would throw gold at her feet just to spend a night with her. I believe that when Dany grows up, there is nothing she can't do if she just spreads her legs, Anderson said, looking at the lamb chop in his hand with a lewd expression. I'm going to kill you. Viserys took a deep breath, immediately thinking of 9 ways to kill Anderson. Among other things, he could throw the fork in his hand and impale the man in the throat. But unfortunately, he couldn't act now. If he did, no one in the courtyard would survive. He couldn't let anyone else pay the price for his actions. Morel and his son were terrified, glancing at Viserys, afraid he might do something rash. Helbo was shaking with fear. Viserys had always impressed him as someone who could kill a man as easily as a chicken. He also knew that Dany was Viserys' Achilles' heel. Now that Anderson was about to exploit this weakness, could Viserys suppress his anger? They say a mother is a child's first teacher, and it seems the prince has learned his lessons from a good source, Anderson sneered, looking provocatively at the lamb chop in his hand. When Viserys spoke rudely to him, the ferocity in Anderson's brown eyes swept toward Viserys like a wolf's claws. But as their eyes met, Anderson felt a chill down his spine. Viserys' burning purple eyes, slightly engorged, were unnerving. The stainless steel knife and fork in his hand were twisted together like a metal twist. Anderson suddenly remembered that the young man before him was not just any mourner, but one with fangs. Dany was Viserys' only concern. If Anderson pushed too hard, he might not leave this room alive. Fearing Viserys' retort, the Morel and Helbo felt as if they had fallen into an icy pit. All they could think was, please, stop. Viserys and Anderson's eyes locked like swords above the table, emitting a fiery glow. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The maid Jill had fainted, her face pale and bloodless. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The knife and fork in Viserys' hand made a sound that set everyone's teeth on edge. Faced with such a cold atmosphere, Anderson couldn't stand it any longer. He said, House Frigger is very interested in the shadow of the moon you invented. He stopped mid-sentence, his meaning clear, hand over the soap, and you'll be spared for now. There are many interested parties, Viserys replied, leaving the rest unsaid. Who do you think you are? However, Helbo was screaming in his heart, give it to him. Please. Give it to him.
Thanks for listening.